Okay. Always got to check with our technical people. Call this meeting of the Rockport Select Board to order for Thursday, November 5th. The first item, and a couple of announcements to make before we actually get started. I was just informed earlier tonight that apparently the public notice of this meeting did not get sent out, or at least if it didn't get sent out, it didn't go to the press. I apologize for that. I had put the agenda together a couple weeks ago, and I assumed it had been sent out.
Let's pose that as a question, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Did anybody in the audience read about this meeting in a recognized press operation? I see lots of no's and no yeses. Well, we just
Okay.
might be in trouble here.
Well, it was posted as, it was required by,
All right, well,
by law.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was posted.
Well,
All right, well, it is streaming. It's available to be seen later. And
okay. The second item, we have a shortness of agendas for this evening. Another small stack has been put over there. And there was also, apparently, there was another piece of paper put over there, headline notes regarding Rockport Public Library space requirements, October 2015, by a member of the library committee, Stephanie Lash. That was put over there by a member of the library committee, and it was not something that the select board put out. So with that, we'll go right straight into it. As I said, well, actually, I didn't say because it apparently didn't get posted to everybody. We're first going to receive a presentation by the library committee on what they came to an agreement on as to what the necessary requirements and space needs are for a future library. I will then ask for public comment, and I would ask that, you know, if you wish to make public comment, please try not to be repetitory with others who are making similar comments and to keep your comments short. I then will ask the town manager to give us some of his thoughts very briefly, and then we will go into our own discussions about the library and where we think we need to go or should go on that. So with that, I will turn to the chair of the library committee, Kate Monroe, if you would.
probably my no pages.
I think I need a little bit. Feel like Edith Ann. I wanted to start the presentation by giving you just a, well, let's see if I have it. Introducing the library committee of the people that are here. There are 5 people in the library committee. Michelle Gabrielson is intervention coordinator. She's our education person on the committee. Eliza Hazelton, who's here, is a businesswoman in Rockport and is very active in the community and has run many fundraisers. Stevie Cumble is not here tonight, but she's kind of our institutional memory because she's been around for been here for a long time, been active in the library community for a long time, professionally in all aspects. Stephanie Lash, who is also here in the back, and she is a physician and has been on the library committee for, she finished out a term and started a new term a year ago, I think. So there are 5 of us and myself. And I just wanted you to know that we are a diverse group and we are not a unanimous committee. You'll see that. But I think that we are representative of Rockport, and we're kind of a microcosm of the world of Rockport. So in a way, that makes us a good group to be working on this project. Our future planning has been going on for a long time. Well before I started on the committee, We started looking at the idea of expanding in 2003, and I will not be going through the entire history, rest assured. But I just want you to know that if you're interested in going back and looking at the history of the planning for a new library, and you can go onto the website and click of the library and click on future planning. What I will start out with is a few definitions before I get into what my charge is tonight, which is to cover current and future library programs and estimated space. But I wanted you to know what programs mean. Programs mean all services that the library offers to Rockport. Programs mean not only the story hour, children's activities, the Marine series, the book club, and other activities, but programs also mean our different book collections that we offer to the town and the other materials, DVDs, etc., computer area and instruction, teen space, and interlibrary loan. There's a lot of different things that constitute program. And the other thing I'd like to give a definition of is when we talk about program space, and in Bill's spreadsheet, he also calls it functional or assignable space. This is the area that we need for the programs to function. And it's the area for the staff to be able to do their jobs and support those programs. The other definition I want to give is the unassignable space. And we've had a lot of good discussion about this. You know, when we talk about the idea of how big a library is, there's the program space and then the unassignable space, which are things like bathrooms, space for the mechanics, the stairwells, the elevators, entryways. It's also how thick the walls are. You know, we're talking about what makes a building. That's not what we were charged with looking at. But it can range from 30% of the total space, from 10% to 30%. But this is a good time to remind you all that we who have been studying this are not architects. Our numbers may sound precise and exact and specific, but they are estimates. They summarize the type of programs we've identified. An architect will put them together and lay them out and fit the unassignable spaces and into a building that fits on whatever site that we are looking at. So I just want you to hold that in your head. The last thing I want to define is I want to talk a little bit about the University of Wisconsin assessment tool. That gave a total of 6,161 square feet that we are doing, that is recommended for what we are doing now in the space that we're in. That 6,161 square feet, which sounds really precise, includes unassignable space and program space. So when you kind of winnow out the unassignable space, we're talking 4,500 square feet. But the thing about this assessment tool, it was done as one of the first steps in planning. And Ann Philly provided that baseline when she completed that assessment tool. It was used for the steering committee so that they could work on making their recommendations. That information was then given to Steve Pogany so he could use it in his report, the Library Services Study. And it's actually in that report in Appendix B if you're interested in going and looking at that. So basically what it was saying that in our current program space of 2,700 square feet, we are providing 4,500 square feet worth of programs and services. This does not include library programs that are held like in the Opera House or, you know, in the park across the street. This is only, you know, what's being actually held in the library. And so it really shows how we have utilized our space to the maximum. The current space has been a great workhouse, and we have amazing libraries. We have had a history of amazing librarians who have worked hard to give the people of Rockport more programs than our space is really designed for. Given more space, we could do more, but, you know, we've reached our limits. Now, Steve Pogany, the former director of the Portland Public Library and a library consultant, prepared the Library Services Study and Building Program Statement for the Library Committee. He presented it to the community in June, and that study, backed up with his demographics and his research on the future of libraries, he recommended a total program space of 9,264 square feet. The August 17th meeting for the Library Committee, and it was actually a workshop on library size. We reviewed his report, and we came up and used Appendix G. Appendix G just had all of our spaces in bubbles, so we could say, oh, we need X amount of space for our fiction and nonfiction, and this much for children's space. So we looked at that, and we came up picking those areas. We said came up with a total optimal space of 9,450 square feet. Now, note, this was not a consensus, but we did agree on a range of about 7,500, according to the notes, to 10,000 square feet of total space. But it wasn't a meeting, and we didn't vote. September 10th workshop with the Library Committee and the Select Board, you were there, and I remember, and it was determined that the Library Committee needed to vote on the program spaces. So we went back to our Library Committee, and we had a meeting to do that. And this brings us up to last week. So I wasn't going to go back to 2003, but I did have to go back to June. Ben Blackman, our interim director, library director, prepared a space needs justification report. And for those of you who don't know Ben, he's right here, and he's our wonderful intern director. He's got his master's of library science. He's worked in Rockland and Orono and at the Folger Library. Fogler? Fogler. No, not the Folger, huh?
No,
Now, that would be pretty cool. I would be jealous of you on that. But, you know, he's really bringing a tremendous amount of energy to a critical transitional time as we move into temporary spaces and whatever. But in the middle of organizing a move, he also prepared a space needs justification report. Now, he used an assessment tool called the Whole Building Design Guide, WBDG, which is a program of the National Institute of Building Sciences. And he took our actual collection numbers and things that we have now, and he put it into that program, and he came up with a number as well. So we had several different information, and it was, I think, a good idea to have that different perspective just as a point of comparison with what Steve came up with in his report, but also using our real statistics. Not that Steve didn't use them, but Ben had them listed in his program, or in his report. And so then we, and so it was especially useful because it laid out our current space usage. So we went through the current collection, and the current collection, with the number of volumes of nonfiction, fiction, children's material, large print collection, and space needed to properly display those collections. You've got a summary of that, but the adult nonfiction and fiction collection is 25,000 books. Audiobooks, DVDs, CDs, and other items are currently 1,400 items. And using this program assessment tool, the 25,000 books, so that they're displayed so you can see them, and they've got space to be looked at, and they're not up to the ceiling, which is hard for people like me, is 2,500 square feet is what was this assessment tool assigned to it. The audiobooks, 1,400 items, 140 square feet. Now, this is trying to put into reality the bookshelves, the ADA requirements for having people go through in wheelchairs, all those different types of things. Children's area, the books, there are 11,000 books in that, and so that should have about 1,100 square feet. So that's what was used in bringing up those numbers, are laying down a baseline for those numbers, and also current programs, having space for children's area, having space for the current services of interlibrary loans, so they can receive the library deliveries in a place where they can sort, and it's not right in the middle of the circulation area. Also, the circulation reference book cataloging and the space needed for that, the current programs, like I said, plus the book clubs, presentations, and also the technology that we want to have for our patrons. We want to have the space available for people to actually use their computers or to use our computers. And so those are what we're doing right now. And that's the kind of space that we need. And then we looked at the future programs. And the future programs are about continuing to expand our current programs to suit our patrons' needs. We are offering as much as we can in the space that we have. Given more space, given the right amount of space, we would be able to do more to serve the people of Rockport. So what we looked at was allowing a modest amount of room for growth, keeping in mind that books and how information is being delivered is changing. We also looked at having 2 small conference rooms for those privacies for small meetings or tutoring or even quiet study space, which, we don't have a lot of. We wanted to have a flexible floor plan. I think that's to have movable bookshelves to give us the room to reconfigure our space. And that way, it can accommodate the future of how information is required and shared. Another thing is an expanded teen area, because we believe, and I think this is important, in engaging the next generation of Rockport citizens in lifelong learning. So the space for technology, cubicles, and computers need to be expanded as that part of our information world expands. So the estimated space requirements, on October 27th, the library committee met and reviewed the space needs for the current and future programs. Each area was voted on by 4 members of the library committee and passed by majority. The total space that we came up with was 8,750 feet. The first area was the commons, circulation, and reference desk. It's at 500 square feet for that. That was a unanimous vote. The public technology is 300 square feet. That was 3 and 1. And most of these were 3, 4, and 1 against. Staff spaces, offices, work area, 900 square feet. The children's room, that means the collection and the program in the children's room includes not only picture books, but it includes the juvenile fiction and nonfiction. It includes the young readers collection, and it includes children's activities for a pretty big age group, actually, and that was 1,500 square feet. Teen, young adult area, 500 square feet. Fiction and nonfiction book stacks, 3,000 square feet. Other collections, 750. Program, reading room, for example, or like the marine room, basically, is 300 square feet, and 2 small conference room at 300, and that was the other one.
Had it wrong.
Did I?
Yeah, it's for the program reading room. It was 1,000 square feet.
Oh, you know what? I forgot the storage for the program. Thank you very much. So the program reading room is 700, the storage for that, because, again, we want our space to be as flexible as possible. Whatever we do, we want to be able to have it serve double and triple duty. So if it's going to be a program, you want to be able to move the tables and have the program there. Or you want to be able to reconfigure things as needed. And so that 300 square feet for storage needs to be there to hide the tables or the chairs. And then 2 small conference rooms, so that gave us a total of 8750. My conclusions, I want to emphasize that we are not architects. The space we need may well fit into a smaller footprint, but these are the spaces that the majority of the library committee has voted on and identified. I think we should build a library that will meet the current needs and will allow for modest growth and have a flexible floor plan to respond to changes in library service. And I think we also need, when we're looking at this, to plan the surrounding area for wherever we are, for maximum safety, for access, for parking, and outdoor spaces. Because we live in a beautiful area. We're in Maine. We want to be out there and enjoying it. I think we would be great if one of the things that we could look at is the establishment of, and I think that's on your agenda, of the building committee or new library committee. We at the library committee does have a building fund. We have approximately $50,000 earmarked for the building fund in our monies. We haven't voted on this yet, but there seemed to be general agreement that some of these funds should be available for a conceptual design for a new library. Just makes sense. A public library provides access to information and a guide to reliable resources. It is free. A public library offers the opportunity for people to meet, discuss books and ideas, and the public library differs from the school library because a school library is only available when school is in session, and it is curriculum-driven. It supports the curriculum. The town of Rockport has a great opportunity to build a library to serve all of Rockport. The library can be both a beautiful building in a lovely setting that we will be proud to show our visitors, and a functional place that serves the entire community. We can build a library that has space to house what we're doing now and the flexibility to adapt to what we will need our library to be in the future. So I encourage all of you to join in this lively challenge of building a great library for all of us. Thank you.
Before you sit down,
Do you have any questions?
do we have any questions we wish to direct to them at the moment? No? Okay.
We'll have some later on.
Aha.
Okay, so that I can,
Don't wander away.
oh, I thought I was done. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. With that, let's move on to public comment. As always, we ask that the public comment be brief and to the point. As I mentioned at the very beginning, please try to avoid redundancy. If others have spoken about the exact same things that you are asking for, please be very brief about that. But we are interested in hearing what everybody has to say. I do want to make a quick comment here that we're here to listen. We may take positions later that are contrary to what you are saying. That doesn't mean we haven't heard you, but we have to make decisions. And we can't, as Abraham Lincoln said, you can't please everybody all the time. So with that, does anyone wish to make public, pardon? Oh, and if you do wish to make public comment, we'd like you to come over here to the podium. That way the people at home can both see and hear you. So who would like to make public comment at this time?
Oh, come on now.
Mr. Priestley. I'm sorry, that wasn't the reaction I was expecting. Okay.
Just since much of the presentation was talking about square footage, and that would seem to be a general concern, how big is this library going to be? I actually had a question, or a series of questions. The program square footage, does that include, other than the storage you mentioned in one specific space, does it include general storage, like closets, for example? It probably doesn't. Does it include bathrooms? Does it include utility room? Does it include janitor's closet? Does it include walls?
No, that's,
Does
that
it
was the,
include,
that's the unassignable space.
Circulation?
Yeah.
So
Mechanical.
corridors, whatever. So, I mean, just a general rule of thumb, just for, education, add 25%, maybe 30, to the program areas to get the gross area of the building. Just, you need walls, you need corridors, you need a furnace, et cetera. That's my comment.
Excuse me.
Jim Ruddy from Rockport. And just to follow up on John's point, because I don't think anyone's mentioned it, but on the spreadsheet that you did, the unassignable space is 3,200 feet. So the space that John's talking about, the bathrooms, the hallways, the entry to the building, that's not on the list either. There's a number of places that aren't in the 8750 square footage and are not included in that, and you're calling those the unassignable space of 27% of that. That does add up to 3,200 square feet. And the total, when no one seemed to mention, is 11,988 feet, basically a 12,000 foot building. So in order for us to build this building, we're building not an 8,700 square foot building, but a 12,000 foot square foot building. So I just wanted to clear that up so that everyone knew what size the building actually is.
And I want to make a comment on that, because while that says 27%, I found out after we'd done our initial work on this that using the University of Wisconsin's scheme, this challenges rocket science, but it goes and it says that it's really 27% of the total amount. So somehow you have to go from your assignable space to a total amount, so you can multiply that by 27% to come back down to that unassignable. It really, according to the University of Wisconsin, is more like 37% of the original assignable space. So it gets
And
really
that's-
confusing. And they just use that as a rule of guide. As Mr. Priestley said, it could be anywhere in there.
And I did that math and came out the same way. So you actually take the 11,988 and multiply that by 0.27, and you come up with the unassignable. I just want to make, it's confusing to think of this, that we would be building an 8,700 square foot building. It will be a 12,000 square foot building. And that's, I just want to make that clear. And keep in mind, that's nearly 4 times the size of our current library. The unassignable space is the exact same size of our current library. So just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Well, why don't you just walk across in front so we don't lose track of you? It's easy to get lost out there.
Turn into a different person.
Yeah.
Chamberlain. I'm from Rockport and have been on the Friends of the Library group and continue to work on the book sale. Couple of things that I'm concerned about. One is the location, because the location for all of the people in Rockport, it seems to me, would be far better in the area where the school was. It's much more central to the entire population of Rockport. The entire population of Rockport is, what do we got? Well over 3,321 people. And I'd be interested in knowing if any of you know how many people live in the village area and are close to it. I've had conversations with a couple of people who said they don't come to the Rockport Library anymore. And the reason they don't is that they can't find parking and it's not safe. So I think before we decide one space or the other, and I'm not saying we can't do it in this space safely, but that I would like to make sure that we do. That's important to me. The other thing is that we keep our options open, that we not lock ourselves into a specific place without thinking about and finding out from an architect what kinds of things can be done in all the locations that might be available. Also, I'm concerned that, I guess I would ask you all, have you spoken to the Bach family to see if the restrictions that they put on this space years and years and years ago are something that they would want to hold us to? Because if you have not, I don't think you're being responsible.
I have spoken to Mrs. Bach, and the challenge is, while the local heirs may be totally agreeable to that, the will is very clear that it goes, you know, the deed is clear, it goes to all the heirs. And it's the heirs of Bach, Zimbalist, Curtis family, which is all around the country. And the chances of getting an agreement to an unknown number of people to agree to moving it and letting the town maintain possession of the property it's a really difficult challenge.
Well, I'm not sure exactly why you say that or how you say that. I think we need to find out before we make a decision saying this is what's going to happen. I think we need to question the people who are involved and find out what's on their minds. And they have been so responsible and so responsive to the needs of this community. And if we show them that the space that they gave us those many years ago is not really as good a space as another space that we already own, they may change their mind and say, okay, go ahead and change it. But I don't think we should make that decision without finding out or doing our best to find out. So, thank you.
I'm Helen Shaw. I live in Rockport. I'm also one of 4 certified genealogists in the state of Maine. And regarding the will, I've done a tremendous amount of probate work and looking for heirs and so on. In terms of the Bach family, the first thing to be determined is what is current state probate law in terms of who is classified as an heir. And that will tell you a general idea of how many heirs you need to have to make this decision. I'm not familiar with Maine probate law. I'm familiar with probate law in some other states, which basically says if you've got, say, Mr. and Mrs. Jones and they have 3 children, those 3 children are their heirs. The children of those 3 children are heirs of the first one, so you only need to go to those first 3. Now, as I said, you need to look at what the probate law is here in Maine. Then you'd need to determine how many children Mrs. Bach had, how many of them got married, how many had children, how many of those people are still living, and follow it down from there. It could be just half a dozen people or so. It could be a couple of hundred. It depends on what current probate law is.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Bill Froelich, and I live in Rockport. and I've watched this process for a number of years, and I have several concerns. One is that I thought the vote that was taken some months ago indicated that a majority of people voting did not want to continue to consider the space where the former elementary school was, that there is a strong feeling that the space given by the Bach family in one form or another should continue to be used for the new library, whether it's a brand new building or whether it's a remake of the old building. Second, I'm concerned that we as a community face a number of potential demands on us financially in the near future. As you know, the school request for a new middle school involves at least $20 million. And at least some of that is going to come from the pockets of the taxpayers of both Camden and Rockport. I wish I had a sense that at the same time that you reduce the value of waterfront property in Rockport, that you were thinking about the many retired people who will not, I fear, be able to sustain substantial increases in taxes and stay in their current homes. And it seems to me that as the library committee and others think about a wonderful new library, that they should be taking into account the concerns, financial and other, of all of the residents of the town, and particularly the elderly who do not have substantial incomes coming in. So that concerns me. I also am puzzled why during this process, knowing that there are a substantial number of people who would like to see a smaller new library constructed, a library in the range of 7,500 square feet, including toilets and hallways, etc., why the library committee or the select board has not brought these people together to try to reach some sort of compromise. It sounds very much to me as if the situation that exists in Washington, D.C. between the Democrats and the Republicans is somehow at work here, and that trying to reach something closer to a compromise has seemingly not occurred. No one has pushed people to sit down and try to figure out how to make as large a group of people in the town happy with what we all hope for, and that is a larger and safe and appealing library. So I hope that as the select board considers the various elements, that they will try to look into at least the next few years of potential tax increases and reflect their concern for the many people who cannot pay large increases in taxes in the future and remain in this wonderful town. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Then you, David.
I'm Linda
Kapp. I'm also a resident of Rockport, West Rockport. And I brought in, I'm glad, I want to follow up on that comment about last year's election, saying that we had voted, that the town had voted, that they didn't want to consider the RES site anymore. And so I made a copy for each of the select board members. They only made 5, because, you know.
I'm not a member of the select board.
But anyway, so to refer to that, first of all, the first question was on the article was, do you agree that the town of Rockport should develop a plan for a new library? And the emphasis that this flyer worked on was, why would we want a new library when we can renovate our current one? And then the whole premise. Oh, and I should say, this was sent to all residents of Rockport right before the vote last year. So many people who hadn't been concerned with a library got this right before they went to vote. And so they're going to look and they're going to say, wow, we can expand our current library and make reasonable improvements that will nearly double its size and meet its present and future needs for a fraction of the cost of the RES proposal. Well, easy fix. Why would I want to do RES when I've got an easy fix? So that was one part of their decision. Then the other, for the next vote, it was Article 9, do you agree that the town of Rockport should primarily consider the former Rockport Elementary School site as a location for the new library? And for the reason in here, it said, if we only consider the RES site as a location for the new library, doesn't that basically eliminate our choice of any other site? So I'm up here just to say, don't eliminate any site yet. Hopefully we can get a library possibly on the present site with Memorial Park with it. Maybe we could have a great library. But if all of a sudden we find out, wow, that's going to be astronomically expensive, maybe we do need to look at RES and say, well, maybe this is cheaper. And we don't know yet. We need to do the research. And I do want to commend the town of Rockport for getting the facts right and checking the facts and getting the engineering study done so that we had some real facts to go by. This really wasn't based on facts. As you look it over, it really wasn't based on facts and engineering studies. So I think we need to forget about last year's vote, start again, look at different sites, and get the information.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson?
How did the vote turn out? It was non-binding. How did the vote turn out? You asked for a vote, we voted.
Okay. We're taking comment from the people up here at the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Dave Jackson. I lived on West Street, and I've been there for 30 years. As to size, I think it's very hard for all of us to relate square footage for different programs to particular rooms and so forth. So let me just throw out one basis for comparison. It's not why I'm really up here, but it's one thing I think I can do. The addition to the Camden Public Library, which is a space I think we're all quite familiar with, it's the lower level on Atlantic Avenue. That's 9,000 square feet, and that includes only 2 restrooms and a janitor's closet as unassignable space. That space is fully utilized. The children's room is overutilized, so they have to use the picker room for most of the children's programs, which occur every Tuesday and Thursday mornings. So that's just barely enough size for the Camden, that use of the Camden Library. And don't forget, there are 2 more floors. There's a second floor where they have a mechanical room, and the third floor, which used to be the ground floor, which has an additional 4,000 square feet. So if you relate to those things, I think you can see a little better what we're talking about in terms of space. As to the vote, we had 2 non-binding votes. I'm still unclear as to what a non-binding vote means, but I'm assuming when people get new information, they have a chance to change their mind. We voted on two issues. Excuse me. One was whether or not to build a new library. Well, isn't that what we're here talking about? So we are ignoring that vote, but somehow we're embracing the vote that the RES should not be considered. It doesn't seem consistent to me, but anyhow, maybe somebody can explain that to me. Thirdly, I think I understand that we're going to propose tonight that we appoint a building committee. That's a really good move. And that we commission an architect to do a concept study of 3 properties. Well, I fully endorse that move, but I think to just study the properties that I understand are going to be proposed, which would be the present site, the memorial park, and a combination of the two, would really be leaving money on the table. Now, we're talking about cost. Nobody's more concerned about cost than I am. I think we're probably looking at the 3 sites that are probably, of all the town-owned properties, the most expensive to build on and the least practical to build on. And not to include the RES in that study, to me, is just closing options. My prediction would be if you don't include the RES now, we're going to be back here in 6 to 8 months saying, well, okay, that's way too expensive. People are demanding a lower cost option. Let's now look at the RES property. Okay, that's fine. It's just going to take more time and more money. I don't see why we can't include that now. What do you got to lose? I'm not advocating for one location or another, but I'd like to see all the choices. Thank you.
You? Yes, sir.
Hi there. My name's Doug Posson. I live on the other side of the tracks, the other side of Route 1. And I've given most of this talk before. I'm going to say it again, though, in this context. I'm the president of my homeowners association, and I have spoken with all the people in my, not very big, but the representative association, and asked them what they thought about all the things that have been going on the past few years in terms of the future of the library. And what they have been consistently saying, we just had our last meeting last week, is we really don't want to pay more taxes, period, for a library, for anything for that matter. Well, maybe that's not totally realistic because, you know, things cost money. But they don't want to pay more money than what they have to. So thinking in terms of the numbers we've heard here tonight, a 12,000-foot structure, wherever it's built, based on the numbers that were done by the steering committee last year, $250 to $300 a square foot for building costs, plus architects and designs and so forth and so on. So 12,000 square feet is roughly $3.6 million. So translate that into 3,300 people, or how many households there are in town, 1,600 households, whatever that number might be, and it's a fairly big slice of cash. So what I urge you to consider is that whatever the proposals are, if it comes out to be 12,000 square feet, that the building committee, whoever they are, take a serious pencil to paper and make it smaller, because making smaller makes it cheaper. It also opens up options as to where you can build it, how you can build it, and how quickly you can build it. So just as an example, I'm not really familiar with all the numbers that are in the report, but let's say the 1,500 square feet proposed for the children's room. That's $450,000. Now, it might be a couple years old, but the last number I saw, there's 300 kids who live in Rockport. So that's $1,500 per kid. Now, one of my neighbors in my association has 3 kids. So her share would be $4,500. If I went back and told her, hey, the town's going to spend $4,500 for your 3 kids to have space in the library that you can use now and again, she'd be appalled. So I urge you to be serious about thinking about smaller is better, and smaller is cheaper, and smaller is probably faster as well. So that's my word.
Thank you. Others?
My name is Patty Witt. I live in Rockport, and I guess I'd like some clarification. When that last librarian, Molly, decided that we needed a new library, and she got the grant, I believe it was $10,000, I believe, she, and I guess the library committee, commissioned an architect to do a conceptual drawing, and that library was going to be placed on the RES site. And if I remember correctly, perhaps somebody can look it up, the projected cost from that architect was about $6 million. Four? Was it four? Okay. So that tells you somewhat what it would be to put a library on the RS site. And I guess I don't really agree. I think I've lived in Maine since 1978, and over I've seen issues that when prevailing thought doesn't get the vote, we keep bringing it up again and again until people are worn down and vote. I consider the votes against RES as accurate, honest votes.
Thank you. Anyone else? No. Okay. Then you, John.
Yeah, Sally Cook, Rockport resident. Just to say that I'm still not convinced that the current library could not be expanded. The engineering study didn't look at all the foundations. The man who reported that study said that they didn't. And the mold was a possible problem, might be a problem. There was no hard evidence ever that it was a problem. There was no air quality study. And large portions of the foundations have never been directly observed by an engineer. Now that the staff is out of the library and the building is empty, I think...
They're not out yet. Yeah.
Well, when it happens, I would recommend that the town hire or rehire the same engineering firm to actually drill through the walls and look at the foundations. And if possible, at that point, also do an air quality study.
Thank you. Mr. Priestley wanted to speak, and then we'll come to you.
Sorry, I didn't identify myself my first round. John Priestley. So again, from the architect's perspective and responding to what I've heard a number of people say about cost, I don't know where the perception of the current site and park being an expensive site to build on comes from. A flat piece of land is easier to build on, but the increase, the incidental cost in building on a slope is trivial when you think of all the components of a building. I've been through this. I've built on topography that is far more challenging than that site. Look at what they did in Camden. They put the entire building underground. So these sites are not challenging from a building standpoint, and in respect to a budget, the increase over a level site would be so trivial that it really shouldn't factor in the equation. I think there are bigger considerations at play. The second observation I have in respect to cost is it seems to me that unless there was some kind of release from the box, which sounds dubious, that by far the least expensive solution is to build on the current site. Because if you build there, the town retains the use of that land. And the RES site could be sold off and that money put towards the library or any other town needs. If you build on the RES site or some other site, you give up land in the middle of the town. Why would the town want to give up a valuable piece of property? It would be financially irresponsible, I think, to consider building anywhere else when you consider that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Baldwin?
My name is Bob Baldwin. I live in Rockport. And my concern tonight and for some time has been that this has been a very costly process. in terms of our select board, in terms of our library committee, in terms of the library staff. And frankly, I see that the town right now is pretty well divided. I feel like probably a majority of the folks are not in favor of a large library, and there's another significant group that's in favor of a larger library. I think that there's been so many plans and so many proposals and so many consulting fees that have been paid that the expense is not just all these fees, it's the expense of our time, it's the expense of our consciousness of our community and our pride in our community. And for us to just kind of go ahead as though and ignore these very basic underlying problems is just going to mean a lot more time is going to be wasted. I think we're not at the point where we're ready to build and hire an architect. I think we've got to, as someone said earlier, we've got to do some compromising and figure out how we can be in this so the whole town or a majority of the town folks are behind this. We don't want to spend another 2 years, come up with a wonderful architectural plan and then have it shot down.
Thank you. Anyone else? Then we will close this part of our meeting and move on to the select board discussion. Now, as I said before, we've heard everything that has been said here tonight. We've heard things that have been emailed to us or stated in the past. If we happen to come to a conclusion that is not exactly in line with what you feel, it's not that we haven't heard you, it's that we have also considered other items. So, with that, going into our discussion, I've asked our town manager to provide us some thoughts of his as to the direction that we should go. And I've asked him to be brief.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Some of my comments are going to make some people happy and some people not happy. And I'm going to apologize for that. But my job and my responsibility is to get something built. And we need to build a library. I think most people in this room all agree that doing something for our library is the most important thing we have on our plate today. And in order to do that, we need to make some concessions. And I put together an 8-page letter to the board to help give them some guidance on the decision-making that they need to make. And I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, thankfully. You're lucky I'm not going to do that. But Bill has asked me to make some comments based on the letter that I submitted to them today. And many of you have heard me in the past, and it bears repeating. If you were to ask 10 planners and community development professionals with a solid history of good community planning, you would get the same answer to the question, is it ever a good idea to move the library out of the location it has been for the past 100 years? They would all say, no. It is never a good idea and should only be considered when no other option is available. In fact, we heard that from Jane LaFleur. Jane was recently just awarded the Planner of the Year in the state of Maine, and at a recent meeting. There is a viable option available. In fact, it is one of 3 listed as viable by the steering committee last year. That is the combined land site donated by Mary Curtis Bach for the purpose of a library. The village is in a very fragile state right now. The loss of the library, even in the interim while we move out, while we build and make these decisions, is extremely troublesome to me. Say what we want about the vote last November. in my opinion, it was a vote on the RES site. People came out. Nearly 60% of the voters who voted in one of the largest voter turnouts in recent years voted not to consider the RES site as the primary site. More than 70% of the people that could vote voted. This is nearly everyone that had an opinion came out and took time to vote. It's not like it was 60% of a low voter turnout. It was 60% of more than 70% of the voters in town. This is not a small number, and it wasn't close. 20% of difference in the vote. The discussion about the site has to be settled once and for all for us to move forward. Anything short of a clear decision on the part of the board will set us back months and ultimately years of getting anything done. There are arguments on all sides of this that make sense and have validity, and I have said before, we are faced with a very tough decision. Because you decide one way, that does not mean that the other way is wrong. It is about what we can get done in the time that we have. We can continue to analyze, measure, consider a bunch of different options. The longer that takes, the further it will take us from the goal of building a new library. By combining the lots, changing the south end of Lime Rock Street, narrowing up Russell Ave, there is a lot more available space and many more options in play to solve the parking and space needs. A lot has been said about ledge on the lot. Ledge is a fact of life in Maine. It is not the problem it once was. We have new methods of removal of ledge. We put sewer and water lines through ledge all the time. Parking has been identified by many as a serious problem. This is somewhat true, but according to our own in-house parking inventory, there are 172 parking spaces within a 4-minute walk. The library deed does have a reverter component in it, where the property reverts back to the heirs of Mary Curtis Zimberlis Bach in the event the town no longer uses it for library purposes. In the event we build a new building somewhere other than on that land, we would cease to own the property at 1 Lime Rock Street and what we now know as Memorial Park. This would then become owned by the heirs and would likely be unused for many years. The meeting tonight could be one of the most important ones you have had as far as moving the library forward. While the decision you make might not be the most favored by each of you individually, it could be that it is a decision that will most likely get a new library built. This is a difficult conversation and a difficult decision you need to make to get the town to move forward. As I said once before, this is a right versus right question in which there are valid arguments to be made on all sides. But at some point, a decision has to be made and a direction picked by the board. It is my opinion that the only way forward is for the board to vote to establish a building committee to fully explore building a new library on the land donated by Mary Curtis Bach, and for that committee to come back to the board with a plan to move that concept forward with a bond in time for the November election. This plan will take several steps, but the first is up to you. You need to decide on the site you want to focus on. We can no longer go back and forth from one site to another. We need to make a decision. Once you do that, the challenge is to make the decisions that are the basis for what the new library should be. These are broad stroke of the brush decisions, but are the basis for the committee and the architects to move forward. What I would suggest as a start is we need to build a library that meets our space needs. We haven't established what those space needs are, but once we establish them, that's our goal, meet our space needs. We need to have dedicated patron off-street parking. While there is parking around the building, we need to have parking that is dedicated for the library. We need to have the capacity for expansion. No matter what size we build, we don't know what's going to happen in the next 20 years, so we need to be sure that when we build a library, we don't say, oh, if we had only done this, we could expand it. We need, I believe we need covered outside space so that patrons can use the library outside at the times of the year where we all want to be outside, because we know what winter is like. The new library needs to have a prominent place for memorials in the park. Many libraries, in fact, most libraries, have a memorial component to them. In our case, we have many memorials, and they should be prominently displayed, and that should be part of the architect's charge. Patron safety in using the Opera House for library programs is critical. If we build a library on the current site, we should be using this space and the upstairs space. But in order to do that, we need to make sure that pedestrian traffic can go from the library to here and from here back to the library. Modifications to the intersection to improve traffic flow for vehicles and pedestrians. This is not only to improve the library, but this will improve the whole village for pedestrian traffic. We should resist the temptation to start designing the library in our heads. I am guilty of this as much as anyone. Leave this work to the professionals. I would recommend create a building committee. Find people whose goal is to get this done and have the skills to do it. You may have to meet again in a special meeting to interview and appoint members of the committee and develop a time frame to get this done as quickly as possible. There is a lot to be done between now and next November. In closing, I'd like to say I've worked with a lot of boards in the last 38 years, and this would not be an easy task for any of them. You have impressed me with your ability to wrestle with tough problems and solve them. I am confident that this is a task that you can accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get into our discussion, anybody want to ask specific questions of Rick at this time? Oh, well, then let's move forward. I put together a list of 5 items that I thought we'd want to discuss. I didn't put them in a specific order, just as they came to my mind. That I think we need to look at the library programs that are being proposed and the space requirements, that being 2 things. Physical considerations, parking, exterior spaces, safety. Location considerations, that's going to be the big nut. And then the creation of a committee, and how we want to go about trying to do that if we get to that point tonight. So, with that, the pause that refreshes? No. I was there when they took their votes. As Kate said, a lot of them were 3-1, but with each one of them, there was a great deal of discussion. In some areas, more than others. In others, some very heartfelt discussions. As I believe she said, that there were, the library director, Ben, did put together a criteria list of what he thought should be in there, and gave some ranges and what some of those spaces were for. For example, when he was talking about the book stacks, the fiction and nonfiction areas, he laid out exactly how much we would need for space just to hold the current collection. Then he added in other aspects of it, such as room for growth and how much that would entail and what kind of a period of time that would be probably good for using reasonable expansion. Some other items like space at the end of some of the aisles for seating, or a standing place where somebody could put down their notebook or tablet or laptop and stand there and work. So, he put together a proposal, and that came out quite a bit larger, about 100 feet larger, 1,000 feet larger than what the library committee came out with. Dr. Lash put forward her proposal in writing, and brought it to the board that night. very well thought out. It was one that was provided here earlier and that I have passed around to all of you. At the same time, Kate put together a brief presentation as to what she thought we should be accomplishing, or we, and I'm, including myself in the library committee at that. I did not have a voting component. I just sat there and pretty much listened. So that's how they came to their decisions. As again, they are recommendations. We do the hard work here. Rick, I think in one of his notes to us says that's why we get paid the big bucks. Yes. Okay. All joking aside, though, we need to start putting boots on the ground here, I guess. You'd probably understand that reference more than the rest of them, but, that's where the shoulder meets the grindstone. I've got all kinds of cliches. So, with that.
What are you asking of us as far as the library programs is for input?
Do we agree with what they have presented to us? The square footage areas. One thing if you notice, they didn't even include an entryway because they felt that was part of what the architect would come back and say, get your stuff where you need it. You need an entryway of this amount of this size. So it's not something that felt they could dictate. The rest of these are what they felt are necessary, and that's then to us to say yes, too much, too little, about right, or we don't want it at all, because that's always an issue. I don't think we want to, at this point, take into consideration what the overall size will be. One thing that we may want to consider, though we don't need to adapt or adopt, is it doesn't need to be on one story, one floor. The one we have now is all on one floor. Everything is there, including the one washroom, the little small stairs to the second floor office for the director. It's all on one floor, really, except for that little small office and some storage space that the architect said we better hadn't be using. It challenges the structural integrity. So, and there's always the possibility of a basement under it. The current one has a basement, if you want to call it that. Most of it is just pure crawl space. Some of it is so small you can't even really crawl easily in there, is what we have been told. So, but it's our decisions here now.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to start by saying that I respect everybody's input on this. The Library Committee has done some tremendous work, as you've noted. I've met with people over the last several weeks with various different viewpoints on this. I've read every email that's been sent to me, every letter that's been sent to me. I've heard it all. So I want to just say a general thank you to everybody who was taking the time to talk about this, because it's important for our town. As a way to sort of dive into this, and we'll see where it goes, the unassignable space is of interest to me because I've seen in some of the documentation that it could range anywhere from 10 to 30%, depending on how the design is made and things of that nature. One thing I want to mention is, I will refer back to all the information we have, because we have a lot of information now. In both the report from Steve Podgeny and the facilities report, the importance of having a basement in the library was mentioned. And I think, and this is going to be a question for the architect, but a question that I think we will want to have an architect answer. Some of that unassignable space could perhaps be basement space, which could then reduce the usable space, and, well, I don't want to say usable space, but the absolute square footage of the building, because most people, when you have a building built, you don't count the basement as the square footage of the 12,000 square foot building. But if we can put some of the mechanical systems in the basement, if we can use some storage space in the basement, I think that will help to reduce the size somewhat of the building. So I just throw that out there as a possibility. Again, based on the reports that we got from Steve and from the architect. So I'm gonna let that sit and see if anybody else has anything to say on that.
Okay.
I got a couple things to say, I would hate, we've heard an hour of public testimony that went, has a fairly wide range of viewpoints. And we have several bodies, the committee and several individuals doing their best to build up to this idea of square footage. All of those efforts, I think, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, are valuable, but they suffer from from two things. One, that they're presupposing design ideas that are in your head. That okay, this space is only here. It has these walls. It has this space and that sort of thing. Secondly, so my big point is that none of us are architects, except one or two in the room. And while this information is important, I don't think we need to be sitting here saying, should mechanical systems be in a basement? That's not important. It doesn't really change the price of the building. The big question is, I gather we have two questions here. The biggest, hardest one is basically what size should this building be? Do we want to have a building that is, and I'm going to use these as assignable, as functionary numbers and not add the 10 to 30%. So do we want it to be 6,160, as Dr. Lash says? Do we want it to be 8,750, as the library committee has? Do we want to have it 9,450, as Ben suggests? Those numbers, once we say we want to have a building that is approximately this size, all the rest of that stuff will be worked out by people who really know what they're talking about. So I think what we need to glean from all these numbers is the relative importance, the relative space requirements for the different programs. And I don't think that we're going to sit here and we're going to say, throw the kids to the curb or anything like that. We're not going to say anything like that. One of the things that we could address with some considerable benefit is, do we want to have a standalone building that incorporates the function of what this room does? I have my personal opinions on that. That's a good thing for us to talk about, because that does radically affect what could happen with that building, with the proposed new library. But Ben reminds me that is not in there. So I'm assuming that that's no longer a question.
No, the room that we're proposing as sort of an event space in the report that I wrote would sit about 30 people.
Mhm.
And when it is not an event is not going on, it would basically serve as what the Marine Room does now. It's a quiet reading room.
Okay.
So there isn't a single picker room like the Camden has, or the community events room like Rockland has, that would just be an empty room with maybe art in it. It would actually house a collection and then be sort of dual purpose.
Is that called the program reading room?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 1,000 square feet.
Yeah, so that's 1,000 square
Now,
feet.
by the way, the room that we're sitting in right now is 1,225 square feet, of which, for a meeting like this, about 600 feet is usable. You can take this room, you can cut it off at the other side of those posts. That's pretty much what this room is. Cut us right in half because we're totally not usable. And the room is about 600 square feet, just to give you an idea of what that is. So 1,000 square feet is, a little bit smaller than this room. It wouldn't have posts in it, so it's more usable. Just to give you an idea. Okay.
But at the same time, what they're recommending is really only 700 square feet, 300 being the storage for the contents of that room, the tables and desks or chairs and.
I heard that in Kate's thing, and I must have put it in a different place, because I have page 5.
Yeah, and I
Oh,
mean,
that's library, but that has to do with the library committee. You came up with 1,000.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's these two
Right.
together.
Yeah, and because I put, and I didn't know, I'm not an architect, I have no idea how much storage.
Room
space
storage
we're gonna
lending.
need.
Yeah. Gotcha, okay.
And I wrote in the report that, there's a lot of wiggle room in that 300 square feet
Right.
for storage. But I mean, in that room, we would need storage for chairs for people,
Yeah.
or close to it. And there would be a collection, and I put about, total for the collection, and then with growth, about 250 square feet. So that's with shelves on the wall. The 50 square feet too, the way that the math works on these, basically is any of the growth, you just want to work out the volumes, and this is all a little fuzzy, because not every book's the same.
Right. No, I get that.
You know,
That's why you have guidelines.
Yeah, it's a guideline. So for 50 square feet, that would be approximately 500 volumes over the course of 20 years, 30 years of building. You know, and that's with weeding, but that's, you know, not a very big number of books added to our collection. And, you know, from a librarian standpoint, I don't want to have a library that's the classics and the bestsellers. I'd like to have a depth of range in every collection that we have. We are part of a library consortium throughout the state, so too, if we are the only person that has a volume, we can get around this in some instances if the book's sort of like, oh, whatever. But we're required to hold that last volume for the whole state at large, or New England at large. So, you know, there's a lot of things that you have to look at when you think of collections.
So in my attempt to convince the board to look at sort of big round numbers rather than adding up 250 and 100, would you say your 9,450 is you know, about 700 square feet bigger than library committees?
Yeah.
Would you say that is utilizing this different matrix, which is a WBDG? Is it a function of that, or is it a function of your desired growth that the library committee didn't put in?
Well, the difference is definitely where the report that I did for Rockport. I mean, really, I'm coming at this from, I just want to preface this, I may say mine, but that's not what I mean. I'm coming at this from with these programs, I can do this for the community. But they definitely whittled down some things from the report that I put on. It was a compromise. I mean, my actual report came in, I think at almost 10,000. 991, yeah. Yeah, and so, but, you know, the 9,450, that was the optimal space that we had all came to in August. And at the end of my report, I think I said, you know, we could hide the difference. A good architect can do amazing things. So
You can overcome the
you
difference.
can overcome a lot of that stuff.
So the last figure that we have on this, the 11/4/2015 Library Committee square footage vote that they're bringing to the select board. And again, we're just talking sort of the big round numbers, 8,750.
Yeah.
Is that a function of compromise? You presented your
Yes.
10,000.
Yeah.
They pushed and pulled and beat you up.
Yep.
And they came up with 8,750.
Yeah.
And then indeed, another member of the committee said, we can do the same with even less than that.
Yeah.
Is that a fair representation?
Yeah, that's a fair representation. And the reason I sort of, the way that I made this report is I wanted to get outside of the library community. And that's why I went with this report, this sort of matrix, because it's from the National Institute of Building Sciences. I didn't want it to have any sort of footprint of ALA or library or anything. Like, this is what, like, an architect would use, or a kid in an architect school would use, I don't know. But it seemed very legit, in my opinion. And so that's what I used to do all of these things with. They sort of broke them down and made this compromise. I think, and the way this too is laid out, I wanted everyone to be able to see when you take away something, this is what you take away. So, one of the things we took out was 100 square feet for seating within the stacks in that conversation. So, you see that. That's 100 square feet that you won't have sort of a comfortable, nice place to sit within the stacks. That's gone. And I wanted the report to be at that level. I thought that's what you wanted. I thought that would be helpful for, to turn it into an actual thing instead of 200 square feet. It's actually a desk or a chair or a person. So that's how this was made and the philosophy behind it.
So if, and I'll yield in 1 second, if we were to say, in our infinite wisdom, that we came up with a number that was less than yours, I would think and hope and expect that you would present the architect with, these are our programs, these are what we think this space represents. But additionally, we had talked about this kind of feeling, this kind of ambiance of a soft chair at the end of the stacks and everything.
Yeah.
Can you work that in?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, and that's where that's the difference between saying we lost 100 square feet, that means we just won't have that.
Yeah.
Or, and or the opposite, building it up. We get to this number because we want 100 square feet for this thing. And having a brilliant designer that says, here you go.
Yeah, I mean, and I think keeping that cozy, friendly feeling of the library is something we definitely want to keep in, like, if you do an RFQ to a library, to a architect, that's something you should have on that list along with all of the other things. The aesthetic does matter, it is important. And, you know, whatever size works out, like, I'm advocating for the people of Rockport, for the community, for the programs. You give me something great, you'll get something great out of it. I mean, the return on investment in libraries is huge. That being said, whatever I get, I'm going to work the hardest for the community, and the staff is going to work the hardest for the community to use that space 100% of the time and do our best.
All right. Yeah, thank you for that willingness. And the one other thing I want to address came up in the last half an hour is that I've had the pleasure of once in my life, and it'll only be once in my life, of building a house with an architect. And it wasn't easy, wasn't fun, yielded a wonderful result. But it's really, really important for everybody in the town to understand that an architect is not going to take the exact same building and that would be up on the corner where you have this very interesting angle, you have this top of the hill feel. That's going to be an entirely different building than something that we put in RES. And so if for those people who say, keep all the options open, that's essentially doubling our initial design money or initial, cost of saying, what would a building look like? Same building, same, let's say 8,500 square foot building. It's twice the amount, and John, tell me if this is right or not, but it's probably not twice as much money, but it is a considerable bit more money to say, we'll do a drawing of a conceptual building here and then one for here, because architects, when they're doing their work well, they are reacting to everything that surrounds that site. Is that an accurate, fair and accurate?
It probably wouldn't double it, but it'd be close to that.
Yeah.
Because the design is entirely site-specific, access, sun, topography, placement in the village, you name it. So,
John, a question?
All right.
John, as an architect, and I'm not sure, there's another architect in the room?
Yeah. It's Craig.
Yeah. As architects, how important is it that a decision be made to the exact square footage at this point? How important is that, or is it okay to have it in general terms? Here's what the discussion has been.
I think I mentioned this at a previous meeting. I think you already have enough information. I've heard so much work put into studying the programmatic needs. It was recapitulated this evening in easily sufficient terms to feed to your architect. And an example I could cite is when I designed the Montessori school, the building committee came to me, there were certain square footages that were known that described their program. The final result was quite different from that, not just in terms of the area, but in terms of the understanding of how those areas would pack together, how there could be flexible space that combined some of those functions in ways that the building committee couldn't even have imagined. So we ended up, for example, with a central meeting space that it was combined circulation, it was performance space, it was the big meeting space for the school to have an assembly, all mashed in together in a way that you would have taken those programmatic elements separately if you had them on your spreadsheet, but when you see it packaged in its final form, those square footages have slid around, they've overlapped, they've combined in ways that have made the building more efficient. So I don't think there'd be any point in honing the numbers beyond what you have. I think there's a tremendous amount of information there. I think you're ready to launch in respect to the square footages.
Thank you. Before we go on, I think we need to keep a definition or terms in perspective here. What we're talking about is floor space, not footprint. You know, let's say we go 8,750 feet, if you go to 2 stories, it's not gonna be a footprint of 8,750 feet. It's gonna be smaller, but you're gonna have, as part of that on the second floor. And as been pointed out, if you have a basement under that, it hides a lot of sins.
That's usually older basements do that.
Yes, yes. Ken?
This discussion is interesting, and one of the things that, as Jeff was talking, that I started to think about is, I don't know how much the committee talked about. I mean, it was brought up about multiple different uses of spaces, and some of what John talked about too. For example, I mean, we've committed, just to pick the numbers off the spreadsheet, of 1,500 square feet for children's and 500 for teens. Is this a possibility where we have 2 + 2 + 2 = 5 in some cases here, where we can perhaps use some of the space, and perhaps an architect might be able to help us with that? And the other comment I want to make, and to John's point here, is that I think what we're doing and what we as a select board may have to respond to is these numbers are telling us the library committee's thoughts on the relative importance of the programs in the library. Whether we end up with the exact number of square feet that's presented or not is immaterial, but this tells us, for example, that the most important program is the fiction and nonfiction. That's the one with the biggest number. The next most important one is the children's room. And so, we can look at that and then,
It's the most space intensive.
Well,
of them.
yeah,
I don't
because-
agree
because
that that's-
most of that number comes from what we already have.
Right.
That we already the way that the numbers work for the report that I did to come up with the 3,000 square feet for the nonfiction and fiction, we have it's about 25,000 volumes, and when you just do the division, the way they have it is divide your volumes by 10 to get your square footage. So we need currently, for the volumes based on this metric, 2,500 square feet worth of space for the collection.
Right, but you're saying that it's important that we have that collection there. That's I guess my
Well,
point.
it's an investment that we've already made.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's some relativity, I think, in these numbers as to what's available.
Well, and I would have to disagree with you there. I mean, just because the teen area started out at, 50 square feet and went up? 64. I'm sorry. And it went up to how much?
Right now, I've got earmarked for it 500 square feet.
Right.
Yeah.
Just because that's a small amount of space doesn't mean it's not an important thing. So I don't think it tells us the importance of these pieces of the puzzle. What I think we need to go back to is what our dear Mr. Priestley keeps telling us, is that we've talked this to death. We have asked good people, we have paid good people to tell us what the programs are in our current library and given us a good idea of what we're gonna need into the future. I don't think we need to talk about that, or for that matter, talk about which ones are more or less important. Because I'm not gonna say, we're gonna stop having books and only have children's library. I mean, that's not a logical thing for us to do. I think that at some point, what we need to do is say, we have a belief in what's been given to us. We think that the professionals we've hired and the good townspeople who have given great amounts of their time as volunteers have come up with these numbers. We either need to say, yes, we believe that you've come to some good numbers, or we say, no, start over again. But going through and picking through and saying, 500, 200, 1,000, none of us have done that research. I mean, maybe some of you guys have. I have not. I think that we should rely upon Steve Podgeny, the library committee, our library interim director, all of which have huge amounts more information and knowledge about this than any of us do. And talking about individual amounts in individual places seems like a horrible waste of our time, and honestly, very inappropriate given how many other people have put their time into this project already. I'm not gonna say I know more than any of the people that have worked on this already about whether it should be 100 feet more or 100 feet less. We just need to decide whether or not we think that what they brought to us is well thought out and suits what our collective need is. And if we don't agree with that, then we need to send it back with instructions as to what we expect. But honestly, I have heard plenty, and I really believe that the people who have put time into this have put a lot of effort that I think is very good, useful effort.
Owen?
If you don't mind, unless you want to build on something, and I can.
Well,
just
I
have
was
the
going to
last
ask
word.
the only question that could follow that statement, but I'd love to hear
No,
yours.
no, please. If it's building, we're talking about building, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we.
It's fine.
You know,
No, I-
we have to keep in mind also that there is a contingent in town that feels that more is better.
Well, and there's a
You know,
contingent
and
that
they
says
have been
less
here
is
to-
better.
well,
So-
less is better. I'm
like I
sorry.
said-
That's what I
Okay,
meant to
I
say.
don't know where you're going, but.
How much
I got
bigger
my
are we
tongue-
gonna
I
go
got my
here?
tongue wrapped around my teeth. I couldn't see.
so, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman-
but less is more appropriate here, or better, and have made arguments, cogent arguments, both tonight and in other settings, that we're looking at too big.
I was going to be that voice, but I'm going to wait for Jeff.
Okay. No, and since Owen's young, he's going to be able to remember his question. I
wrote it
I
down.
still have I still have a question for Ben in terms of what does growth look like that you're imagining? Because every so often in your
Yeah, the room for growth. In
Right.
I think that in almost every place except maybe the entryway. You know, I don't think we need a bigger entryway. You know, and room for growth, really, I mean, I don't think we're building a building for the next 5 years. I believe we're doing it for the next 20 years or 30 or more. Yeah, 50. And so the room for growth, I actually think is quite modest. You know, when I put 500 square feet in for growth, say in the fiction and nonfiction collection, when that translates to books, that's 5,000 books over the course of 20, 30, 40 years. That's not a really big increase in the collection that we already have. And, you know, in the profession, we're always weeding, we're looking at different things, you know, science goes out of date, we update it. So there's always sort of turnover in the collection. But again, you know, we're not getting rid of Dickens. So there are those books that we won't get rid of that'll always stay there. So in each section, there's room for growth in that. And in some of them, I mean, frankly, I think it's a little too small over the course of 20, 30 years. But, you know, it's hard to really anticipate that. Books aren't going away. I don't think everything's going digital. There's a lot of press about things like that. A lot of that press comes from urban areas. Rural areas are slow adopters of technology in general. We'll be behind the curve. If everything goes digital, we won't go digital for probably another 20 years. And I don't ever see that happening. So that's where the room for growth is. And so all of those numbers, just multiply them by 10 and you get the volumes that would go in there. So, you know, in the teen room, I only put in, I think, 50 square feet for growth.
500.
Yeah, so it's 500 volumes, which is a pittance. You know, really, it's a really small amount over the course of 20 years. If you think about what you were reading 20 years ago and what there is now, I mean, 20 years ago, young adult, that wasn't even a real genre. You know, you had Hatchet maybe, and Little Women. Yeah, no, I mean they're great books, but I mean it wasn't. This was pre-Harry Potter. You know, it was a different world. So that's what those rooms for growth are.
All right, thank you.
So here's my little bit. Thank you for everyone that wrote us. It was all really, really good information. So I kind of had a number in my head, not as far as programming and not as far as expansion and the library that we want to see into the future. The number I had in my head was what do the taxpayers have the stomach for, to pay for? And that crafted a kind of square footage around in my head. And we've exceeded that with these numbers. But that doesn't mean that I'm in any way opposed to these numbers, because we want growth. We want great access to different things, the programming. I guess I just haven't seen the good fundraising capacity part yet, but we're not at that stage yet. And it's still that kind of cart before the horse. Where are we at? You can't fundraise for something you don't have kind of a picture about. And then when you get that picture about, people are going to go, well, that's way bigger than the picture we thought we were going to be paying for. So now getting to your point, you know, what's going to happen to my taxes? So I'm at this kind of a quandary as far as these actual numbers, and I am in favor of taking these numbers and giving it to an architect and saying, how can you maintain that number to that program, but have there be good overlap so the overall total falls a little bit closer in line with where I was at, but then you get the fundraising component. So like, why scrimp if you're building for 50 years? There's no point to scrimp if you're building for something for 50 years. But always in the back of my mind is, you know, if this was completely taxpayer funded, we're asking them to foot the entire bill, and then an extra 1,000, 2,000 feet is a significant difference.
And that is one of the things that the library committee is going to be addressing, is bringing in a professional on their dime to start that process of determining what could be fundraised. I was in a meeting, I want to say it was probably a year, maybe a year and a half ago, where someone stood up and said, in a community like Rockport, it's not inconceivable to be able to raise $3 million or more for a library. Yeah, and, you know, which, depending on where it ends up, you know, could result in a very small. But it's something that has to go on in conjunction or in parallel with what
And that's the
we're
funny
sending
place
architects
where
out to
I'm
do,
at.
so that when we go to a vote, we have specific numbers. That it's this, it's on this site, and it's gonna cost the taxpayer this out of a total of that. There's moving parts. So, Ben?
Yeah, and I do want to address sort of the funding of the library because it is a little different. It is split. The library committee actually pays for our operating costs, which is about 20% of the budget. It's about 20% of the budget. So when people talk about a bigger building is going to cost more, unless we increase staff, it's not going to cost more to the town. Because it's going to cost more to the library committee because they pay for our heat, they pay for our electricity, they pay for the books, they pay for everything you see when you walk in that's not the walls or the people that serve you. So an increased cost isn't going to be felt by the town for a bigger building. It's going to be felt by the endowment, and this is sustainable. It's not. It's
I guess
not
that doesn't make sense to me. If we're paying for the building,
You need to read the budget.
Yeah.
Because we have a very fascinating scheme.
Yeah, the library, and I'll go over it with you if you want. The library committee and the budget for the library is it's an interesting thing to learn
so
about.
10,000 square feet versus 12,000 square feet has no bearing on the taxpayer.
No, the initial cost of building it
That's what I'm-
definitely
okay.
would be,
But
but
not-
the operation.
Yeah. Oh no, I totally
Yes.
got that.
Okay.
I was hearing
Yeah.
we can build bigger and it
Oh,
just goes
no,
to the
no, no,
library.
no, we don't have
committee,
that
and
much
I'm like,
No, but part of the library committee role will be.
For sure, the
is
ongoing
fundraising.
year after
Ongoing
year after
fundraising.
year costs. No, I get that.
And-
No, but in fundraising.
Fundraising for the initial building.
Yeah.
That's
And-
what they're doing.
And I think that that's a very important component of the building committee
Mhm.
to consider, you know, to have
Yeah,
that say of a fundraising consultant to see what we can raise.
yeah, and the library doesn't just serve the Rockport community. We serve a much larger community than just Rockport. Camden, Rockland, Hope, Apple, many people from outside that 3,321 people are represented in our sort of community
And
of
part of our
library
fund-
users.
And part of our fundraising
Yeah.
base.
Yeah.
I have a question to ask of the select board at this point. There are some people that would like to make additional public comment. We've taken public comment, we said that was what it was gonna be. Do we wish to open it back up for some abbreviated public comment at this point, or continue on our discussions? I'm asking this of everyone.
Yeah, from this side of the bench, I would say short, non-argumentative public comment would be good because we have discussed some things that gets people thinking.
Okay,
So,
and what we've done up to this point, since the public comment period, we have asked specific questions of specific experts in the audience. It wasn't a public comment kind of a component at that point.
And I would rather stick with that. We've been here for almost 2 hours already, and we haven't gotten through the first part of our select
Well,
board discussion.
okay.
And we have 5 parts. So I have to be honest that if we're gonna continue to move forward, we need to move forward,
Right.
not continue to take in more information.
I've heard from both sides of that. Ken, Owen,
I'd like to
move forward.
I kind of like to wrap up. I think Tracy said we were talking about one. I think we've talked about A and B here, library programs and library space requirements kind of together. I'd kind of like to see if we could wrap that up maybe, and I don't know whether we can wrap that up before we move on to something else or not, but that would be my thought.
Tracy has suggested that we accept the report and as.
Well,
you
it's
know,
an option,
as the
and I
option,
haven't
yeah.
heard
Well,
anybody talk
yeah.
specifically about other options other than to specifically talk about specific
Yes.
programs.
You're talking
So
about taking it
so
as a whole.
The question is are we gonna sit here and talk about specific programs and go through each one of those steps that the library committee's already gone through, and Steve Podgeny has already gone through, and that we've sat through all of those recommendations to us in the past? Or are we going to accept one of these recommendations that's been placed in front of us?
Okay. I am comfortable saying that we are not in a position, we should not be second guessing the library
Yeah, I'm not gonna
experts
micromanage it.
and questioning their programs.
We have lost sight of the question you just posed
Yes.
about the audience, though.
Yes.
We
did
yes or
well.
no?
We've actually, Ken has sort of said that, gone with Tracy, that we
Right.
need to move forward here and get
So
this
it's-
part done. We've got the question in front of us, and maybe we can clear this and get to the next step.
So, Mr. Chair, I would love to make a motion, which I am not going to do because I am a touch concerned. I know,
Okay.
I know. I'd love to.
You're gonna make a motion that you're not gonna make. I
No,
hear you.
that's right. Because I'm a touch concerned that we might not have done our due diligence in getting the word out to the media. So I don't know if anybody's gonna use that against us. We've seen it happen in other communities and other issues. So what I would say is, we, much like a workshop, we sort of say, okay, we feel good about where we are here, move on to the next point, and then at our next meeting, we entertain, I know you love this idea, we entertain another round of public comment because of that goof that may or may not have happened, I don't know. And then wrap that up pretty quickly and vote on these things that
Okay.
we'd like to vote on tonight.
From a legal point of view,
Mm-hmm.
the notice of this meeting was posted in 2 public spaces, and that is all that state law requires. It's posted at the town office, and where else was it posted, Rick?
I'm not sure.
The
At the
post
library,
office?
Yeah, usually we post it at both
And
post
it's
post offices.
probably at the
library,
library
and
as
the
well.
post
The
office.
library, so,
Was it on the website?
That's my,
Yeah, this was on the town's website.
It was on the website, yeah.
okay.
I mean, if you're comfortable with that, I only said it because we got a call from the press that said, hey, blindsided, I didn't know about this until 2 minutes ago. So, if that's your understanding of our compliance, then let's make motions, but
Okay.
I have to bring that subject up.
you could go back and, if we discover that it wasn't and you feel like you could go back and re-vote it at the meeting on Monday, whatever vote you make.
I don't think that really helps.
Yeah. I think we need to move forward on this. Do you want to make a motion? No?
Well, all right,
Okay.
are you gonna make it?
Okay.
Make something, say something?
Say something
No,
or make a
are you-
motion. I don't
okay.
know what we're doing. I mean, I can make I move to accept the library committee's presentation that outlines their estimated space requirements by program.
Okay.
Second.
It's moved in second.
And that, to be clear, that's the 8750 bottom line.
Yes.
The 8750 then plus all the unassignable.
The assigned square
Net,
footage
net,
of.
not gross.
Yes.
And I guess.
And it's moved and seconded. We have discussion.
I'm wondering, if this eventually goes to a building committee and then to an architect, do we want to provide that as accepting their recommendation, but also provide the architect with the other information that we have in front of us, which was the
Absolutely.
other proposals by other people who had different ideas? In other words, saying that we endorse this, but if an architect or a builder finds something that in some of the other presentations it's worthwhile, that they can feel free to incorporate it.
I think that's a very odd idea. I just
Why?
because
It's part of the
I mean,
information that we
but-
have.
But if we give them this report and say, this is the basis, this is where we start, this is what we've agreed to, we're not gonna say, you can't change it. You can't morph two spaces into one space. We're not saying any of that. So, and we keep saying that architects know this better than we do. So I don't see why we would give them multiple reports with multiple sets of numbers and say, this is kind of what we want. I think we need to say, we agree with what we have, or we don't.
I'm not suggesting that we say that we
But,
do it that way.
I mean, I have to think about if you, in your job, somebody says, I want this, but think about all of this too when you do this for me. None of us want that as our job. We want to be given information and say, this is what we want. And I think it's silly to give them multiple things and say, think about all these other things while you do what we ask.
But it's also reasonable to say that, while the recommendation is 500 square feet for circulation and reference, it doesn't have to come in exactly 500 square
But
feet.
we will do that. That's different than saying, look at all these other reports too.
Yes, that's right.
So
Okay.
I agree with that, that we're gonna say this is our basis.
I just want to make sure we're not under the impression that it's going to come out exactly at these
I mean, that's not my
sizes.
impression. My impression is that we're accepting their report and the logic behind their report, saying we think they've gone over all of this information, that they feel confident about
Okay.
it, and we accept their reports to us.
Okay. Owen,
Howdy.
you're looking like you're trying to not bite.
I am.
something.
I'm trying to. I do accept these numbers. I feel that those are well thought out numbers, and I accept them as great numbers. They're just higher than I wanted them to be. But I'm not a stinking pro here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I had to vote, which I will have to do on it, I would vote to accept these numbers, but with like kind of specific instructions to try to whittle it down, get the number to not actually be that close to 12,000 square feet.
Well, now that.
But
that
see, that's not multiple reports. That's just general guidance. You give them the numbers, well thought out numbers, but like you were saying, try to give them some general guidance on don't make it that number. Like that?
Now, keep in mind something that Rick had said earlier tonight. One thing that we may want to look at is smaller but expandable.
I like that.
Just throwing this out, okay? 2-story building, but the second story is only half of the first story, with the idea that we could expand over the rest of it. That might be a way to save some money. I don't know, but it's expandable. Maybe instead of taking this at all at the maximum, because Ben has in there, well, this is for growth. What if we lump the growth and put it somewhere and just say, we're not going to build that right now?
Right, but if we take out a 20-year bond, we should have a building that's going to last 20 years, not say, oh, we're going to take out all of the growth, and in 20 years, we'll then go backtrack and pay for the stuff that we should have paid for the first time. So we're nickel and diming ourselves again.
Okay, good point, good point. Yep.
I guess my point in making the suggestion was that, yes, we need to make a recommendation, and I'm comfortable making the recommendation, but any architect or planner who looks at this is going to benefit from the discussion that the town has had over the last year, including tonight.
So they just have to watch
And
700
if it happens to be
hours.
an architect that's sitting in the audience, the architect has that benefit already. But if it happens to be an architect that's hired from someplace else, I don't know why you wouldn't include other information for them to get a whole sense of the community, counting the fact that we're going to make a recommendation.
It's a good thing that we're streaming this to the internet and it's being saved on the internet, because then they'll be able to look at that.
But part of the point is this is a policy decision. Okay? So taking a policy decision and saying, but all the other things that people have to say that don't agree with our policy are valid. That's not making a decision. That's saying we made a decision and we kind of think it's true, but we like everybody else's arguments and we're going to make you as the architect choose from those arguments which ones you think are best.
I disagree. I think because if you put in, let's look at it in a couple of different ways here. Okay, we've got this 8,750 recommendation, and I think most of us would agree that I think the sentiment is if we're going to make a change to that, it's going to be a change in a downward direction based on the conversation that we've had so far. Now, if the tenor of the conversation was different, if we were looking at this and seeing this as a minimal thing and the trend was upward, that's an important thing for an architect to know.
Right, but
because
we
they
can
could still
tell
look
the
at,
architect that. We
let-
don't
let-
have
let-
to give him other reports.
Tracy, let Ken finish.
I think the information that we have is the information that should be available with our recommendation. And the architect can then look at that recommendation and say, I see what you're trying to do, and I know from the tenor of the discussion that there are some people who would like to see this a little bit smaller. I can provide this programmatic space, and I can do it in 1,000 square feet, whatever the number is. As opposed to a discussion where people are saying, well, this is all we think we can afford. We'd really like to have more, but we can't do it, and then the architect can come back and say, well, I think, I can do this, and I can cut the cost, and I can give you 1,000 more square feet. It's a big difference.
Isn't that our job as making policy? If we accept this, we're gonna take it and we're gonna put it in an RFP and we're gonna add things to that RFP. We're not just gonna give them the numbers that the
That's our
library.
next- that's our
Right,
next
but that's what I'm
point, yeah.
saying, but all of that other information, I mean, what I'm talking directly to is you saying everybody else's reports and everybody else's input need to be given to an architect. And I'm saying we, as a board, need to vote on our policy of what we're gonna put in this RFP. And if that's part of the RFP, if we vote to say we'd love it to be smaller, that's our choice. But I don't think it's appropriate to give a professional widely different, varying views of how things need to be put together and expect them to somehow build us something that we like.
Well,
Okay.
First of all, we're not giving them widely varied. We're giving them, in terms of what we just voted on, which is essentially, what do we think the space is?
We
What-
haven't voted yet.
All right, the motion on the
motion
table.
is,
The motion on the table is basically how much space do we think we need to create a library that is something Rockport can be proud of and that will last, that has good bones for the next 50 years. Okay? That's all we're doing, and it's not that big of a difference between. We sort of get this whole idea with like these 10,000 being some sort of a threshold. Ben's thing is only 700 square feet more than the libraries, the committee, and the committee, right? We go from 8,700 to 9,400.
99. His recommendation really was 99.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not going on the 99. I'm going on the after he got beat up. Right. But in any event, if we were, it would be a normal thing for us to do anything, say 8750 plus or minus 10%. That includes you, that includes Dr. Lashes. No, it doesn't include Dr. Lashes because she's.
Hers is at 4,500.
I thought it was yours is at 4,500?
4,500.
It's the functional space, yeah.
I'm sorry, that's, all right, I'm gonna take my little notes and I'm gonna change that to 4,500 square feet. All right, so we are talking about a big difference. But a good architect who works on public buildings is familiar with this dialogue anyway. They're gonna wanna see this, whether we have that in our motion or whether we make a policy to exclude that information from them, doesn't make any difference. A good architect is gonna dig around anyway. So let's vote on this. Let's move on to the other things because these are things we haven't even talked about. We haven't talked about parking,
Okay.
exterior spaces, any of that stuff. And
Before I call the vote, Owen, do you want to have the last? You said what you wanted to. Okay.
Yeah, we're not approving money. We're just approving fictitious money in the future. And I guess that I'm really just hoping that somehow that number will come down. But I don't really know if that's the best way to vote with a whole lot of hope.
That's
in your
why we get
experience,
paid the big bucks.
I still haven't gotten paid yet.
You
Just so
won't.
you know.
Not until December.
December 1. You got to prove
So,
your worth
Owen-
before we pay you.
Owen.
Okay?
We are in an amorphous stage of a strange process whose end we don't know what it is. And the reason I say that is that if we give an architect 8750 and we give them all this information and they come up with something that's incredibly brilliant, it may be that in this service area that the Rockport Library serves, and I brook no patience with the people who say Rockport Library should be for Rockport people. I think that's silly. We're not saying the same thing at Camden. We go to Camden. Why don't we allow Camden to come to us? So, big area, reasonable plans, somebody gets excited about it, some group of 20 people get excited about it, the cost to the taxpayer may be considerably less than what you fear. On the other hand, there's two ways of looking at it. Going and having the absolute minimum library that doesn't make anybody happy, doesn't make donors happy, and the possibility is that there's very few people that are going to step up for that. So we don't know what it's going to be like. What we can do is, what our charge ought to be, my feeling, is to create the best process to come up with the best proposal for a library that meets our needs, not extravagant and not underwhelming, and go forth with that, do what we can with private fundraising, and present it to the voters.
Okay. And with that, I'm going to call for a vote. All in favor of the motion to move with 8750 as the space? All in favor? That is unanimous. So let's move to
With specific notes to try to bring it down.
cost.
You
Cost.
can't do that. I thought we did.
That wasn't in, no.
No, we didn't vote on that.
That was my.
We haven't done a charge for the building committee yet.
No, well, we haven't even discussed the physical considerations we want taken into consideration by an architect.
Well, the building committee and then an architect.
Oh, you want to go to the building committee first?
Well, that's,
Maybe.
they're the ones that are going to interface with the proposal.
Are we on the third one now?
Well, actually, Jeff is in favor of going to the fifth one.
No, I'm saying all of this stuff is going to be fed through a building committee.
Oh, okay. Ah, I understand now what you meant. Okay.
So, since I'm got a bit ahead of steam here, I would propose that we consider what we'll call both pieces of property on both sides of the street. I would consider that as one site, up to and including the whole idea of closing down Lime Rock.
Part of Lime Rock, not the
part-
whole, yeah.
Are we doing?
Up to and including.
Are we doing location?
Jim
or
kinda needs
physical
to get to his
considerations
house.
here?
Well, he's
Well,
moving-
I'm gonna lump the next two together much the same way we just did A and B, because parking, exterior spaces, location consideration. All right, I'm talking about the site where the library is. Is that part of the location consideration? So, I think we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to the town in the future to look at that as tabula rasa. Is that using the expression correctly? Clear
I'm not-
slate.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that.
So there's a
That
bit of
piece of
Latin.
Latin or Greek or
I'm
whatever.
familiar with it. I'm not quite sure how you're using it.
I thought of the
Blank slate.
triangle chocolate you get in international flights. Toblerone.
That's Toblerone.
I know. I like that though. That's good stuff.
But I think we owe it to ourselves to consider that, and as Rick said, we incorporate the monuments into the site in a, tasteful, wonderful way. That could be a beautiful atrium or something like that. And I think that's what we should go forth with, what we should talk with the building committee with, and what they should talk to an architect about.
So I have a question. Is there at some point that the town or this committee, this board has voted to only look at that site?
No, there hasn't been a motion on that yet. He hasn't even made a motion.
Because I think we still have more to talk about with the other sites, not only with money, but with just reasonable use of the properties that we have. So if the first recommendation forward is that we look at those two as one site, I think we still haven't looked at the site that the current town office is on, that goes all the way back to Route 1. We haven't talked about that. That's 3 acres or so. We definitely haven't talked about RES again, which, to be quite honest, just seems silly to not think about when we're talking about worrying about unassignable space and saying, oh, it's going to be this huge percentage. Well, you build a 2-story building, you've got to have stairwells, you've got to have elevators. I mean, there's things that when you want to bring the price down, you've got to think about those things too. And I think we have not done that part of our due diligence to not look at other pieces of property that Rockport already owns.
Ken?
I have a question.
Owen? All right, yes?
If those two parcels on Lime Rock were actually taxable pieces of property, how much would the town generate in revenue?
Depends on what went on there.
No, I mean, as it stands right now, an open space and a
Oh,
spot with a building.
Minimal. You'd have to, you
Given
first have to
where-
figure out who owns it and who
given-
pays for it.
But given where they're placed, they're worth a reasonable amount of money.
But you have
There's
an,
not a
you
lot
have,
of.
you have an unimproved house lot, that's it.
Right, but you still got an unimproved house lot in the village.
With no
And
house
you
on it.
said that you bought the last unimproved house lot in the village. So,
There's lots of them.
so, I mean, so realistically, that's worth a reasonable amount of money if there was a sale of some sort to happen and a private owner were to have it and build a home on it.
Well, yeah, we're 100 years away from selling it to somebody, selling it to somebody other than the Bach family who would own it upon reversion because we don't own it, we can't sell it.
Right, but it would go on the tax rolls again. If the Bob
Yeah,
family
who would
owned
pay
it.
for it?
Well, yeah.
Right, but
and-
that would be part of the point,
But
is
that's-
that if it reverted back, it would go into private property and someone would pay taxes on it, or we would foreclose on it and it would be ours again. I mean, you kind of got an endless circle there. If we give it back to somebody, they have to pay taxes on it.
But begging your pardon, the work involved in giving it back to the family is as significant as giving it back to the family and having them give it back to us. It's all the same work. So if
We wouldn't need to give it back to them. They would own it. The
Right,
Right.
so we'd have
Right.
to have a place to send the tax bill.
Right, they.
But who do we send the tax bill to?
I mean,
The heirs.
And how are they gonna pay?
so,
Send it out there.
again, and then we would foreclose on it and it would be ours again. So, I mean, that's kind of a weird argument to use because it would be worth a lot more as a house lot than it is monetarily tax-wise. It's worth more as a house lot than it is as a park.
Well, then
As a
what,
park
what
or
is
as a
the
library site?
impact? What is the impact on this downtown village area if it's suddenly vacant and there's weeds growing on it and we're in foreclosure on it? But in the meantime, we've had to move all those monuments out of there because if we move the library, the monuments have to go too. Because it's predicated on a library or a fire station being built there. Was in the deed.
But the fire station issue.
Was gone.
Went off the deed when according to the lawyer, the fire station option came off when the fire station was built down on Main Street by the town office.
So long as the library is on that, it remains viable. But if the library comes off, monuments were never discussed in any of that. They just got put there. As someone pointed out a month or so ago at one of the library meetings, that you forgot about those monuments. They just appeared. There's nothing in the deed that says there can be monuments there or a park. It just says for a library. Adjacent to the library could be argued a park, which then you put the monuments on. But if you don't have a library, it's hard to argue to keep the park and the monuments there.
I have a question
Yeah.
for Tracy. As somebody who has so often said, let's get going on this. And given the fact that we had a vote that indicated a strong preference among those voting to not use RES. And parenthetically, I think RES is a fine site and I think it adds to the walkability, but I am perfectly fine with having the library where it is. Why would you introduce the town office property and all these other things at a time when that would only add 6 to 9 months to the whole process? I mean, that confuses me because all along you've said, go, 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 let's get this done. And then yet you throw in that consideration. What's up with that?
Because people keep saying it has to stay in the village. And I guess I consider the town office in the village. So we haven't done our due diligence. And we're not paying attention to RES because of a vote that only said to primarily consider. It didn't say as a secondary site. It didn't say if it ends up being half as expensive. It said to primarily consider this site. And they said no. I understand that.
Okay.
But what we're talking about now is to take it completely out of the running and to say, oh, we would never think of using that site.
So would you then want to spend the town money to have an architect look at both sites with the understanding that it would essentially be double the price?
Actually, 3 sites.
Yeah, I mean, Bill's been talking about looking at 3 sites all along. No, you're the one that has said.
I
you want
said
to
3
look at
sites,
3
sites. 1 Lime Rock, Memorial Park, or the 2 of them combined being a 3rd site, and that was poor choice of words on my part.
But if we're
Yeah, but
asking,
yeah,
if we're
but-
even considering asking an architect to look at 3 different configurations, even of one site, why
I'm not.
wouldn't we cut that down to 1 configuration of that site and 1 configuration of a site that's flat, that already has all of its services, that has plenty of space, and that has green space that we're still trying to preserve? I don't understand the logic behind that.
Okay, I've lost track of what you're saying about the town,
Well,
the
I
area around
honestly
the
think
town
that
office.
it's silly not to look at that too. But honestly, we've been chasing things that don't get us anywhere for a long time. We've been chasing square footage forever. And it took how many hours tonight to get to a square footage number that people have put hundreds of hours in? And for us to immediately jump to only looking at Memorial Park and the 1 Lime Rock site, I think is very short-sighted of us. And short-sighted in pocketbook, money out of our pockets to deal with the site that we're trying to shoehorn in. And when you start talking about the village, all we have in this village right now is 1 restaurant. That's the only thing that's happening down here unless something's going on in this building. And I feel bad about that, but we don't have a grocery. We don't have any of the things that literally define what a village is. We have 1 full-time restaurant and 1 place of amusement that has events going on maybe once a week during the off hours, off part of the year.
There are other businesses down along
That's
here.
right, but they are not ones that bring in a large number of people. They are not ones that bring in a variety of people. We don't have any basic services down here except for maybe the post office, which is up the way. So we are clinging to a site that doesn't really bring us anything, except perhaps spending more money on it.
I just have to
because
say,
it's a more difficult site.
I was with you until you just made the downtown cave in front of. Now I'm like, God, no, don't take the library.
But what is it?
shit."
What is it that you think that the library could bring down here?
People?
Because it's not.
It's bringing lots of people.
When you're talking about money, when you're talking about bottom line, and you're talking about being able to build on 1 level at a site like RES, you're talking about less unassignable space. You're talking about no worry about.
You're playing architect again.
You're playing, you're
Right,
playing
but
architect. And-
everybody's already said they want that number to come down. And if we want that number to come down, we have to give that architect the best benefit of the doubt to be able to get that number down, rather than saying, we're gonna give you this site and we want certain things in certain ways. So if you want it all, you're gonna have to give that architect the best place to work. And we're not.
Well, we don't know that, I don't think, because we're not architects. I have to say, with regard to the RES site, I supported it at the beginning, I voted for it. We had a high turnout vote, and the vote was not to primarily consider the RES site. That was the vote, and it was, as Rick said, it was decisive. You know, perhaps not overwhelming, but it was decisive. Over the last, since the election in June, when I had to actually campaign a little bit, I've put it out there and said, you know, the 2 votes we had, they were non-binding votes, okay? I have said if people who voted no on the RES site the first time around, now with all the new information we have, and there is a lot of new information, if those people had changed their mind, I wanted to hear from them, and I haven't. I haven't heard from anybody. And so my sense of the town is that site is not going to pass muster. Now,
Oh, okay, so you have to have changed your mind. Okay.
now there are I think the direction we should go is to primarily consider, and I'll use the same language, the combined site. Allowing an architect to get in there with the square footage that we've given them and the program that we've given them, and then to come back to us and say, hey, wait a minute, guys, this site is gonna cost X number of more dollars than a different site might because of problem A, problem B, problem C, whatever it might be. Maybe it's ledge, maybe it's the small size of the site, maybe it's the sewer line. I don't know what it might be. I'm not an architect. And then we have to decide as a town. If the architect comes back with that proposal and says, well, I can build this library for you, I can meet your square footage needs, I can place it on this site, here's how I would do it, here's what the cost is going to be, and by the way, this site, because of the vagaries of the site, the cost is going to be X number of dollars more than it would be on a different site. Then we have a decision as a town to make. Do we think that that site is, that keeping it at that site in that downtown location is worth that X number, whatever the X number is? If the X number is $10,000 out of a $3 million budget, then maybe everybody's fine with it. If it's $1 million extra, then I think some people start to have a different consideration. But I think we owe it to ourselves to primarily examine that site with the idea that an architect is going to tell us if the site is not viable for what we want to do.
Owen, you were starting to say something?
No, I don't think so. I was
Well,
crying
the
back
architect's
there.
gonna make it work, because that's what we're asking him to do.
That's right, but he's also going to tell us what the vagaries of the site are. He's going to say, you know, I can build this for you at this site, and it's going to cost X number of dollars. And he could also say, because of the ledge on the site, that adds an extra whatever the number is, or because of some vagary of the site. An architect can tell us, I think, whether that site really has problems that are going to significantly increase the cost of putting a building there. We can't do that here tonight.
Okay. Are we just gonna let it drop there, or? Is somebody gonna,
Yeah, I will make oh boy.
Don't have binding in there anywhere. I vote against everything that's binding.
So, well, we're not, I mean, we haven't even talked about, can we just at least talk about one site at a time?
Yeah.
And then talk about what we want out of it. So let's go ahead and talk about the primary site. Can I say that?
Okay.
Of the being where it is in the village.
You're not making a motion.
I'm not making a motion. I'm saying let's get this train back on the tracks and we talk about what we're looking for in terms of parking and exterior spaces.
If it were at
the primary site,
the primary
what is it we
site
want out of
of
that?
the combined, which is,
combined-
in your terms, the combined site.
That's what I'd like to talk about.
Okay.
I'd like 12 to 18 dedicated parking spots in a roundabout.
You want 12 to 18, stop there, don't design it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think 12 to 18 additional, new, very safe parking spots are appropriate?
And we need the planning ordinances, the land use ordinances
We're
too.
talking about what we want out of it.
Right, and I think that we're just making up numbers,
Yep.
which I don't think is appropriate when we have ordinances in place that tell us what buildings of certain sizes need in certain places. So, I mean, you guys can throw all the numbers out you want, but we have we have laws in place that we've all voted on that are part of our ordinances, and I don't have my ordinances with me tonight because I'm not on the planning board anymore, that tell us what buildings of certain sizes need.
Okay,
So
that is true.
You can
and-
throw numbers out all you want, but you're just making them up on the fly. They have nothing, they have no basis in what we might need or might not need.
So this is also a town asset, and if conjoined with a vote on a given design for a library, if it includes 12 to 16 dedicated parking spots on that piece of property, you know as well as I do that if there is something specific in that zoning law, if we have the ability and the right to propose at the same time a new ordinance about parking requirements.
And that's not what I'm saying.
No, I'm saying that to you because you
I'm
know
saying
that
we
that's true.
can do whatever we want to do, and we obviously are. I'm saying we have guidelines that already exist, and it seems strange to just jump in and say, let's just throw numbers out there.
Well,
That's
we
fine.
Had, we had guidelines before. In fact, we had a zoning ordinance before
Take one for me.
that said that we could not effectively expand on the current site. we found we could change it.
No,
We went to
I-
a vote of the people, and
I'm
it
not
got
saying
changed
that.
to where we could go to a much larger space, which means we can.
We can do whatever we want to do.
Okay.
I already know that. My question is why would we be making numbers up out of cold cloth when we have ordinances that already exist? That's my question. And if somebody can answer that other than we just want to make up numbers,
No, we are
that's
we
lovely.
are responding to that same dialogue that we've been going over for the last 2 years, including, by the way, this is not an immediate decision, including the same dialogue that's gone over about the locations of it. We are reacting to that input and we're saying what seems appropriate. We've just said what seems appropriate, 8750, because the library committee has said in their realm with programs, they think this is appropriate. Now we're taking that whole process and we're saying physical outdoor stuff. What do we want there?
Right.
We want
And
12.
if we want to go to the experts, that would be the ordinances that we already have in place that have been gone over by planners over the years and have been voted on by the town. So if that's the way we want to go, if we're not just choosing numbers out of midair, we need to go to what has already been gone over and is already known to us and is already enforced in this area of town and other areas of town. And I don't have those numbers on me because that's not something I went and looked up.
Okay.
Because I didn't think we were going to just.
Subject to
when we-
modification.
Just a minute. What?
Bill Napower did an analysis of that when he was here, and Jamie also looked at it again. And the parking requirements in the zoning
Are fulfilled.
are being fulfilled by the other parking that's in the village, the communal parking that's in the village. The requirement is being met by the communal parking that's in the village already.
Right, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we are talking about a building of a certain size. We have ordinances in place talking about how much
There's no-
parking you need compared to what size building you have.
That's not a requirement when there's communal
That's what I said. In this zone, you are right. But in every other zone in town, there are already parking requirements. So why would we start to make up numbers when we have numbers on the books already?
Did you just say that in this zone, Rick was right, there are no numbers?
And that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that if we're going to say we need this much parking, we need to base it on more than I think we should have. We have numbers that apply to other parts of town for logical, reasonable reasons.
But the logical, reasonable reasons for those parts of town is due to the rural area aspects of much of that town. The building that we're moving into down on Commercial Street, you wouldn't dream of wanting people parking on Route 1 and walking in. That's why there's a requirement that it have off-street parking because of the dangerous nature of on-street parking.
Okay, you guys all seem to agree we should just pick a number, so just go for it. Pick a number
these are-
because obviously.
What we're trying to do is come up with the ideas of what we think should also be incorporated into that site.
I think what's less important than the number is the idea that we think, at least I think, that we should have some off-street parking at a library on that site for the reason of which is what we've heard. And again, I've listened. There are elderly people who have trouble parking on the street. There are moms with kids who have trouble parking on the street. So I think
It needs to be designated to library
exactly.
patrons.
Yeah, designated parking on the off-street parking on the site where people can park. And I don't know what the number of spots is. I'm not going to argue with 12 to 18 or 6. I don't know. And again, I think we would want to leave that to an architect to say, because we're going to have other exterior physical considerations too, like we want some green space and we want the monuments. I think we give that all to the architect and say, give us a good balance of some off-street parking, some wonderful sighting of the monuments. We're talking about the combined site now. Some garden aspects of it, and use of the closed off Lime Rock Street. If we do that, I think we throw that all in and say this is all stuff that we want to have included.
Okay, Owen?
And the only thing I wanted to bring up was I didn't just pull that number out of, I had looked at a conceptual drawing for that site, and that was the amount of parking spaces that they had there. And I also brought it up because that is a significant concern of my own. I had replied to a lot of people's emails that I don't go to the Rockport Kid Story Hour with my kids. I don't do it. We go to Camden. They've got good parking, and I can walk right to the Camden Public Library. So that was a huge thing for me, and why I had initially voted for the RES site, because the parking was so bad, and I didn't see a viable plan in the downtown. Seeing a better plan for it, one that incorporated off-street parking dedicated for the library, helped me look at that site a little more heavily. But that's where I got that number from, generally speaking.
To continue the discussion then, you mentioned appropriate use of, or appropriate citing of the memorials. And outside space. Now, when you suggested that, I want to ask a specific question on that. Are you suggesting, as Rick pointed, outside seating for library patrons? Or are you also considering outside space for use during, say, a children's period, a children's hour?
I'm willing to consider any of those. I think that, I think as part of the site, we want to look at the whole site, and we want to be able to say, yes, we have an attractive site, and maybe some of it is a garden path going through part of it. Maybe some of it is outdoor seating and adjacent to the library. I'm fine with all of that, but I think we need to say to a building committee or an architect when we're talking about this site that we're not interested in just the building. We're interested in the whole site to encompass placement of the monuments, some off-street parking, and I'm happy to go down the laundry list of different outdoor uses of the space too.
Okay. One thing I'd like to throw out there, that if possible, and this would only be if there was a usable basement below it, I think, or sufficiently strong attic space above, that we consider the request by the Friends of the Rockport Public Library for space where they can know that they'll be able to sort their books for the book sale. Remember, that organization provides a significant amount of money every year to the library for use in the maintenance of the collections and offsetting all those costs that the library committee bears. I don't want to make it it's got to be so much and it's got to be located here, but it has to be accessible. We used to allow them the use of the West Rockport Fire Station's meeting room. Well, that's been turned into a bay for a fire engine, and will undoubtedly continue to remain so for a good foreseeable future period. Not putting any years on it, but they are right now working in loaned space, but they know that is only going to be a temporary result or temporary solution for them, because the owner has, in fact, actually the original agreement was they were going to be out this year, but they then got at least 1 year extension to that, and they may be back before us to try to find other space come next July. So I'm just putting that out as something, if it can be accommodated, and I don't know how much space it would need to be or how much we would want to have for storage that right now is up in the third floor, or up in the second floor of the library, and that the architects that reviewed it, or the engineers reviewed it, says, not supposed to be, don't want it there. Owen?
So I'm sorry, I had a question for Ben about, that space doesn't exist in either
That's
your
correct.
plan or,
No, I didn't build it into anything. I think if it can be tacked on an unassignable space, if it's in the basement and, it's in a room next to I would love to have it there. But I didn't work it into programmable space, which is, what I'm trying to get for the town.
sorry, Owen.
That's okay. And I think it's a fair thing to bring up. I just don't know. We've already voted on the square footage. Just
Usable space.
additional.
I'm saying if this could be
additional
accommodated
considerations.
in that unassigned.
Here's an outdoor consideration, and I feel bad that Dave just left. I'm going to bring up the trees. Can we give guidance on trying to salvage as many of the good salvageable trees as we possibly can? Some of those are old, and some of them are still in good condition. They should be considered. I know some of them would have to go, obviously.
As we saw last winter, they took quite a beating.
Yeah. I mean, that took care
I
of
want to
some
say
of
it
the
was like
problems
6
for us.
years ago, or maybe it was even longer. Steve Beveridge told me he was surprised that they've lasted. That they, and actually the one that looks in the best condition, if you look up in it, It's got three major cables holding the three major pieces
So
together.
is my understanding then that we would take all of the big trees on that?
I don't think we could
You-
limit.
you do what you have to do.
Yeah,
That's-
that's
exactly.
the
I think that's what you have to do. Part of the plan could be to plant new trees too, as part of the site rehabilitation.
But may I
Yeah.
suggest to this board that we are back once again playing architects, and if we if the charge is to conduct appropriate sensitive use of green space, we'll get, a good designer doing good things. So, I mean, nobody's gonna come in and say, clear cut, blah, blah, any of that stuff. So is there anything else aside from parking on what we want the primary site to fulfill? Are we, for instance, as a board and making policy, are we concerned about the possibility of taking Lime Rock and taking it down to a one-way street? Does that?
I think we close it entirely.
Bingo.
The end. Not the whole thing, because Jim still needs to get to his house.
But that one section there, I think you consider that as part of the site, and whether it becomes a one-way street, or whether it becomes a parking lot, or whether, I would leave that to the architect.
Right, so we're not, we're courageous enough to suggest, to allow any of those possibilities.
I would think so, yeah. I think it was Bill who said there is a sewer line that runs down.
Yeah,
through
there's
there,
sewer
which
and
we'll
water
have to
runs
have
But
some
with money, you
consideration.
can move the sewer.
Well, as long as you have access to
Or
it.
you just shut it off.
You need access. The people who live up there don't need sewer, do you? Yeah. Oh, they all left. Oh, there you are, right.
I think by allowing consideration of the site as a whole, including that section of Lime Rock Street that divides the two lots, we open up all kinds of possibilities for, it gives the architect more to work with.
One of the items that we had, you and I, Bill, have discussed is the possibility of, if we nail down, conceptually some of these options and some of the ranges of space and requirements, that one of the options would be to have do an RFQ process where you invited a bunch of architects to come in and not conceptualize, tell us about their firm or their group, come in and then we would select out potentially 3 firms and pay them an amount of money to say, come up, here's your parameters. We want a building that's approximately, that meets this number of square feet, serves these programs. It has to have outdoor space, it has to have parking, and here's the boundaries of what that can happen in. And then let those 3 architectural firms come up with the great ideas. I'm not an architect, but I would let them be the creative ones, not us. They're liable to come up with something that we are totally missing. I would expect they would. But the key is for us is to select good quality firms or groups that can come up with that will have the creativity that we're looking for.
A different architect in town had approached me the other day and said that, instead of that concept, that maybe what you want to do is offer a prize of, and he threw out, I think it was $10,000 or $12,500, something like, offer a prize and then leave it up to any of the architects that want to, expend their time and energy in hopes of winning that prize. So it would be a different option.
Yeah, there's a number of options.
There's a couple of different ways of approaching that. Owen?
Can I ask you a question? Because you and I talked to similar people that want to see it at the RES site. I don't know if I've read from people that have wanted it in downtown and now are more considering the RES site, like you had kind of brought up, Ken, but what would a vote coming out of here have you be comfortable with? Because as long as it's not binding on this site, and if we get site plan reviews, architectural drawings, that all of a sudden it falls far outside of our budgetary constraints, then we'll consider other sites. But what would make you comfortable coming out of this?
unfortunately, it always comes down to the bottom line. I mean, that's what you were talking about earlier. And so one of my big fears is we're gonna choose this site as our primary site, and it's gonna come up with a number that's huge, and the answer, instead of looking for another site, will be, well, let's just put half as much library on that, and that'll cut our costs. And that's not a road I would personally be willing to go down. I would be very adamantly against that. And I think that the problem is once we get invested into this site so deeply that we've hired an architect or offered a prize or whatever we've done, once we get that invested in that site, we're never going to look at another site. We're just gonna look at more ways to make that site do what we want it to do, which will primarily be a money factor, which means we'll just end up cutting the square footage and not getting the things we need and not serving this town for the next 20 to 50 years. That's the route that I see us walking down right now, because we're talking about trees, we're talking about, there's a sewer line that runs under the street, so there's only certain things you can do. And so you're really starting to put different things upon whoever we choose once we get that invested into that site, that we've given somebody or a group of somebody's that information, and they've done all this work. When they come up with a number that is unacceptable, we aren't gonna walk away from that number. I mean, we're not gonna walk away from the site. We're just gonna try to find a way to walk away from that number, which will be, oh, well, let's cut this, let's cut that, let's do this. And so that's the road I see us walking down now, because, now we've got, what about the Friends of the Rockport Public Library? They need space, and what about the trees? And I agree, those are important things, but we are giving them a site that, by its very nature, has restrictions that will mean that we won't have green space anymore. I mean, no matter how much green space you go around a parking lot, it's not gonna be a place that you want kids to run around in an after-school program when you're trying to talk about the space that we have. So that is an ongoing issue for me, and when it comes down to numbers, I can basically guarantee you that it won't be, let's look at another site. It'll be, we've invested all in this site, let's just cut what we're doing there. And that's the road I see us going down.
I'd propose to you that we already have a design that was vetted for the RES site.
But it doesn't suit the same needs as what we're talking about now. I mean, we have come, I feel like we've all come light years since that design was done, 3-4 years ago?
And it was 14,000.
Right, it was an entirely different.
Including everything.
But that was an entirely different creature. It wasn't thought out the way that we've paid Steve Podgeny to think about it, what we've asked of the library committee. That's basically saying all of that work we've done in the last 3 or 4 years since that happened is useless. You can't compare that. That's definitely apples and oranges, saying, oh, this is what that would cost, so we already know what that would be, because we don't, because the requirements will be different.
I think a number of people voted against the REF site because of that design being there and didn't
Well,
want to
and you,
have that
so,
design on
but
that
that's the
site.
design. But I want to go back to what we were given, because there were 4 color flyers, full color flyers that went out to everybody in town that perpetuated lies. I had people tell me, I'm going to lose my home because you're building a library. We didn't ask for any money. When we voted on 8 and 9, we did not ask for any money, but people were told they were going to lose their homes because their taxes were going up because of the $6 million library that they were told about. So my reality is we've already taken whatever it was, question 8, and said, we have to plan for a new library. We have more information now than we did a year ago. I think it's silly to say, but we'll keep question 9 because a lot of people seem to like it. Because a lot of people liked question 8 too, but we've had to move beyond that.
Well, if you want to go to that, then we shouldn't be doing anything. Because
Well,
question 8
that's-
said no new
And that's
library.
what I mean, but we are. We're walking down that path, and nobody seems to be in
okay.
any way worried about saying question 8 was non-binding. Well, why are we more bound to question 9 than to question 8?
I do think there's a difference between the two questions, and I want to point
But
that
wait.
out. Is it
John, do you have something about, from an architect's point of view, to contribute here?
No, I don't as a citizen, and this will take.
Okay, but.
Right, but we said
John,
no.
we
we
were
said
only
no
looking at you
comment.
as that architect expert, so thank you.
the difference?
As an architect. Reading from the town charter, scope, section 7, powers and duties the duty of the select board is to execute the will of the people. You're talking about the site. You already know what the will of the people is. Your vote is not about which site to pick and whether another site might be better. Your vote is, do we want to back up the people of this town on which site to put the library on, or do we want to just do our own thing? Thanks.
But we're already doing that with question 8. We've already thrown that right out the window by all the work we've done in the last year.
But I'm gonna disagree with that, because I think that, yes, they were non-binding, and yes, the vote was no on question 8, but the difference is that I think that people who voted no on question 8 have changed their minds. We've seen that in the people who've come to the table with this process, and that's very different than
So,
question 9.
All of those emails I've received over the last week that all said, please talk about RES. I mean, do you want me to read their names? Because I've got them right
I have
here.
them all, but they're people who probably voted yes on it the first
So
time.
all you care about is people who change their minds.
Well, I'm
And
trying
I-
to- what I'm-
and
Okay,
nobody
wait,
changed their mind
one
about.
person talking at a time.
I just, that's fine. So it's okay to not think about question 8 because people have changed their minds, but to think that question 9 is set in stone because you haven't heard from the right people to tell you to not worry about question 9. That's really picking and choosing amongst what you have in front of you.
I've asked.
We're willing to vote again.
I've asked many times for anybody.
Okay, that's enough.
Okay, yeah, I mean, we're not gonna agree here. I think it's hysterical that you can throw one thing out, but hold on to the other one as if it's gospel.
I think they're different. The situation is different. And we'll just agree to disagree.
Okay. We have come to another quiet period. We've been at this for an hour, 2 hours and 40 minutes. Do you want to continue to push forward and try to come to location and physical considerations and then the ad hoc library? Do we want to take a short break? Get a drink of water? Or do we want to call it a night and reconvene at a later time to continue these
I want
discussions?
to finish it tonight.
What my opinion is we need to finish this so that we can move forward. We may not be in agreement with how we want to move forward, or maybe even if we want to should be moving forward. But I think that we have to make some progress now if we want to try to have something to the citizens next November. And I'll reiterate the reason why I am set or focused on next November is because that is going to have a turnout like it was last year, a significant turnout due to the fact it will be a presidential election. And it's going to bring people to the polls, and we need to have as sizable a turnout as possible. Our second best choice would be next June, because that's the primary. And all of our elected representatives over in Augusta are going to be on that ballot as a primary, and that will bring people to the polls. So that's my opinion. If I think that if we say let's stop now and let's come back together in 2 weeks, that we're going to be we're going to just be sliding, and we're going to create an incentive to continue to slide even more.
I'm going to make a motion, if I may.
All right.
I move that we primarily consider what's called the combined site.
Combined present site?
The combined site on either side of Lime Rock Street. I think that everybody knows what I mean.
Okay.
And that we include in that consideration some designated off-street parking and consideration of green space as possible.
Second?
Do you want to throw the square footage in there?
No, we already voted on that.
We don't need to
Oh,
contemplate
right,
it.
gotcha,
We're just
gotcha.
voting
Yep.
location and exterior conditions. So,
Parker for the second.
oh, I thought I heard you say that.
Yeah, I was.
And it looked like you were pointing over.
No, I was making sure Linda
Okay.
got it. She's
All right.
right there.
We have the motion. We have had a good deal of discussion, but it is typical now to have additional discussion on this particular question. And do we have anyone wishing to make discussion or
Again,
statement?
I made the motion with primarily consider because I want to remain open to the possibility that if if the site turns out to be unsuitable for whatever reason that we might not know yet, same as we had with the RES site, that we have the capability to look at other sites.
Okay. Tracy, Owen?
I've said my part.
Okay. Yep.
I think the last thing that I'll say is there's just a lot of different factors that seem to go into this decision. So thanks everyone for giving us good information to make this decision with. But yeah, I mean, when you throw all of them in there, the Mary Bach will, the size of it, and then one thing I've also been considering is what are the potential usage of the non-primarily considered site? And one thing that I've been thinking about is the potential for the RES site to become another hub of sorts further on down the line that's not a library, that's some sort of privately funded whatever, I'm not sure. That's got potential to it, and I think that that potential may exceed the potential on the two sites that we would be losing. It's just another thing that had been going into my thought process.
Okay. Yeah, no. Again, you made yours. Hearing no further discussion, I'll call for the vote. All in favor of the motion that's on the floor? Opposed? I will call this by name, that being our normal process. Those in for, or, state for or against. Mr. Casas?
For.
Ms. Murphy?
Against.
Mr. Parker?
For.
Mr. McKinley?
For.
And Mr. Chapman votes for. Now, we now have one item left, at least on the written agenda here, the creation of an ad hoc building committee. How do we want to continue or progress on that? I made some notes. I think we need to have at least one expert on there, an architect, it would be my preference. It may be hard to find a Rockport resident who is an expert in library design or who would be not interested in trying to compete for this work.
I think before we name this committee, we
Yep.
need to have our guidelines written,
Okay.
mission statements, and what we expect of this committee. I mean, it's not like we can't call for people to apply for it, but we really need to take the time for, that we write and approve the mission statement for that committee. We can't just kind of
Yeah, the charge
let
is
'em
very
go.
important. It's critically important, because we have to tell the committee what we want it to do, and we also, I think, have to tell them what we don't want them to do.
Okay. Jeff?
So, I agree that that's an important aspect to it, but I do not think that that comes first. I think it comes simultaneous to, we've seen that committees live and die by the effort that we as a board put into it. So I think that it is incumbent upon each one of us to come up with a list of people to invite to this committee, whether they end up in the final committee or not. But we need a plethora of names and significant information to allow us to, simultaneous to crafting the mission and everything, to populate this particular committee. And I would suspect and I hope that those committee meetings enjoy the same turnout of the public as these meetings do.
Okay. This end of the table?
You guys are awesome.
We do need a wide range of viewpoints on the committee, I think, and that's going to include each one of us perhaps coming up with a name of somebody who we don't necessarily agree with. But I think the town benefits from hearing all points of view.
Just one person that doesn't agree with us? I found a lot.
Do we want to invite people to apply for this, or how do you want to handle that? or should we?
I think we need to take a very close look at those who voice an interest, but Jeff's point also of us going out and finding people we think would be suitable to serve on this would be another
Yeah,
aspect of
and,
it.
and I didn't mean that from a standpoint of you know, someone who aligns with our thinking.
Yeah.
You know, it's the leadership qualities. And I guess one of the big questions is, what size do we think? We're talking in abstract because we have to do that. What size committee do we think is appropriate for this?
My thought would sort of focus around 7, but that's my thought. I haven't, given any depth of what I'd want to see in those 7 people.
Right.
Because that may change to 5, 6, 8, or 9.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I came up with 7, and then I'm thinking back to the amount of work, for instance, the comprehensive plan, and Tracy could talk to the charter committee. Both committees were significantly larger.
No. 7.
Comprehensive plan was larger. And there may be some value in spreading out the workload too. So personally, I would say 7 to 9 is where I would see us going.
And my only issue would be is if we invite people, if one of us invites a person, that in no way guarantees them a space. I mean, no matter how many.
We would invite them to apply.
Right, and I think that's always a good idea. We should do that to any open positions we have. But we're going to have to ultimately make that decision who gets seated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like when we chose the town manager selection committee, remember how many people we had for that? That was quite a task. I would assume that this will be similar.
Rethinking that.
Just an example.
Do not invite those people.
And the other question, I guess, is would we envision this committee needing to have any subcommittees or
That's not really up to us.
Yeah.
Well, I think it sort of is as far as how the committee is constituted. I don't think we need to decide right away, but I think we need to sort of have in mind is do we see that committee functioning that way?
I mean, here's let's go back to the beginning. What are we going to charge this group of people to do? What is it what is the product we expect from this committee?
Well, I think there's several products, but they are time
So
driven.
give me an
One
idea.
would be to have something to us that we could put on the ballot come November. Now, that would have to be done in conjunction with the library committee, because a component of that would be, knowledge of fundraising. I wouldn't charge this committee with being involved in fundraising. But that would be at this point. After a vote is taken, and assuming that it is passed, then they would probably morph into a different type of a committee.
But what do we need
but
between
that would
now
be a
and
different
then?
kind of committee.
Because what goes on the ballot is basically going to be an amount of money probably and a description of what's going to be done. So what do we expect before that from this committee?
I would think that the drafting of the RFP or RFQ would be something that they would have to start with.
And that would be a very
I'd say
time
RFQ and to create a working relationship with an architect finalist. All the steps up through creation, choosing with this board's approval.
Yep.
But that's the very first thing that they would need to do.
Okay.
Would be to start, because everything else is predicated on design and cost.
So we see them more as a group that's going to be working with the design firm or architect or however
Initially,
that
I
works
would think
out.
so, yeah.
Initially with the RFQ or RFP, however it's termed, soliciting.
Okay, so the first thing we'd want from them is an RFQ. Let's just say that.
And that probably will fall more on the town staff.
Well, and that's why
But
I'm
yeah.
asking. So what is it that we want from them? Help writing that RFQ? Help choosing from what gets brought back from that RFQ?
That definitely.
Okay, well that's
definitely.
So we want them to help write an RFQ. We want them to help us choose from the responses that we get. And then we want
We
them
want them to recommend to us those to move to the next stage.
I would see them making a presentation to us about the proposals that they've received, and then making a recommendation, or maybe perhaps saying, we like these top two, now you guys decide. And we're gonna ultimately have to decide anyway.
Well,
Yeah, Bill, why do you think that the RFQ is more staff than this committee? Because the committee is going to create the continuity.
Well, and
through.
I've been, yeah, and I'm, based on what you two just said, that maybe they need to be more involved in the RFQ as much as what do we want coming back from that RFQ? Do we want a lot of them for them to review, or do we want a few that have very specific goals? That
Right, but an RFQ
is it a multi-stage thing that, send us your qualifications and we'll select a number of you that we will pay a certain amount of money to come to the next level, and then we go to a third where it's just the last two for the big prize? Or is there something, that's what I think that that committee should concentrate on.
If we can populate the committee with enough experts, then they may be able to help us answer these questions too. But I think definitely the drafting of the RFQ with, I
The
think,
RFQ
Jamie's help.
is pretty generic. The request for qualifications is pretty generic.
Yeah.
But what the next step is, that's the piece that's gonna take the work. Once the decision is, how do we move forward? What is the product that we're expecting from whatever the process that is decided? That's the part that's gonna take the work. The RFQ is pretty generic.
And kind of building on that, are we asking them to do things like more heavily recommend a brick building, or heavily recommend to have it be all glass so you can see right through it? Generally speaking, the look and the feel of the library to fit in with our village. Is that something we're tasking? Because if they're going to be interfacing with the architects, and the architect we give money to, and they come back with a stinking skyscraper that's got a bunch of windows.
They have to
Doesn't
meet
like
our,
windows.
our physical.
A short skyscraper with a bunch of stinking windows, and it really doesn't fit in. So is that a component of what we're asking this committee to do? Maybe listen and reach out to the citizens to try to find out, not in architectural drawing, but a look and a feel for what you want this building to be.
Guys, this is.
Go on, Jeff.
I'm sorry. I'm in the creative field. I mean, if I obviously have to listen to my client and do more or less what they want them to do, but that will get sorted out. I mean, the choice that the committee heralds through to a finalist situation where two are presented, or maybe three, knock one out for a trial run. The personality of the committee will come through. It's the committee's job, it's the chair of the committee's job to take the good aspects of the range of people there, and if the committee feels as though you bring in a flyer for our who wants to do a mini skyscraper, but all of that's taken care of. We are like massive control freaks here, and we're at our worst right now, and we need to create a committee populated with good, talented, clear-thinking people who know how to communicate with the three constituents, the townsfolk, because this committee will have, will be the force that will shepherd it through. It needs to learn how to communicate with us, bless their souls, and a finalist architect. So
Okay.
I don't, we don't have to worry about glass versus brick right now. That's not our concern. What we need to do is go out and find good people to put in this committee.
But we do need to work on mission statement and what
Yes.
we expect of a product.
That's right.
And
And
that will be part of it at some point, but we really need to have a very specific charge and a list of expectations. So if they're supposed to help with the results of an RFQ, if they're supposed to work with the firm or firms that are chosen, we need to be ahead of it and have thought it through and know what we expect that group to do. Because if we're gonna ask the time of these people, some of which we're hoping are actually experts in the field, whether it be libraries or building or architecture, we need to make sure we're clear with them what we expect to come out of it. So, you know, are we expecting them to go out and have public meetings and invite people to come in and talk? Or are we expecting them just to work with these design groups and take the information those design groups bring to them, filter it, and bring it to us? I mean, we need to be clear about that before we can ask a group of people to volunteer their time for what will be probably an interesting task over the next 9 months or so. It's going to be like having a baby.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing is that one thing Rockport doesn't have a shortage of is smart, creative people. We do have a lot of, you know, really smart, creative people, and I think that the key to this is getting the right people that don't have a horse in the race or a dog in the fight, that just say, we want to get this done, and let's get the right people on the bus and move this forward. I mean, there's a plethora of those people in this town, and we just need to get them involved. And my guess is that they will help us with that, with these pieces of it, as Jeff was saying.
Mr. Chair?
I'd like,
Is this a committee, can we make one statement tonight, which is test the waters for, is this committee limited to Rockport residents or not?
I think we want to look hard at any non-Rockport resident for what they would bring to the table. This is, has been pointed, you know, it's going to have an impact on the tax base of the town. And I think we want to populate most of it, if not all, with residents. Now, if you've got some kind of a very specific expert in mind that may not be a resident of the town, we could look at that. Again, we've got to make the final choices, and that person may or may not fit into the scheme that we want, or maybe, you know, if they bring in a unique qualification, we might want to put them on. If it's redundant with something that one or two of the others might have, we probably would not.
So it's fair to say we are open to people out who are not residents of Rockport?
I would lean heavily, stress on the heavily toward Rockport residents. I'd have to hear a pretty compelling argument, I think, for this committee. Not that I would dismiss it, but I'd have to hear a pretty compelling argument to have a resident.
One of the arguments for at least not being quite so tight is that our library benefits a very large group of
That's
people.
what you're looking at, okay.
But I'm also looking at talent.
It could be that depending on who you have that step forward, it could be that person has a role of advisory capacity only, and is not a voting member of the committee, but they're there to help. You know, I don't know what's out there, who's out there, but there may be somebody that steps forward. I mean, I think you said, Bill, it could be that there aren't that many architects here in town. I mean, there's a few, but they may all want to have a shot at this, and so they'd be excluded from being part of it. And it may be that an architect from another town would be willing to help the committee in an advisory capacity.
Well, I think too, we have to allow the committee the latitude to, if somebody on the committee says, hey, I know somebody who built a library in, you know, Augusta, or not Augusta, but in Windsor or someplace like that, and he's a friend of mine, and he'd be willing to come and talk to us and give us some information. I think the committee should have the flexibility to invite those types of people in if they think it would help accomplish their task.
I was going to suggest that, we need to come up with a mission statement, and we're not going to do it tonight. There's too many things to consider. But I would suggest that we spend the next about a week or so putting our thoughts together, soliciting other thoughts if you think it's appropriate, and then getting back together. I would propose us getting back together on the 17th. That's a Tuesday night. Or a Tuesday afternoon, actually.
Any possibility we could have time at the regular meeting coming up?
We've already put that agenda together, and I think this discussion is one that we need to concentrate on solely. putting that mission statement and then organizing our thoughts on the members or who we think be on that committee. I don't think we want to have it being contemplated by the fact that, okay, we gotten through the regular agenda and it's now 10:45. And trying to then work through that, or pushing everything else back so we could do this and then not being able to give, due credence to the rest of the agenda. I'm just throwing out the idea of the 17th. That's a Tuesday. And the reason I said that is I would suggest that we do this in the afternoon. It would be a meeting, so we would take a vote, but we do it in the afternoon as opposed to trying to do it in the evening.
Taking a vote as far as setting
The mission
the
statement.
mission statement for the committee.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, what's, for you, the afternoon and versus the evening, what's the?
I just think that it'd be better for us to do it in the afternoon so that
A little fresher.
we're fresher and we have more of an incentive to get it done so we can go to dinner.
Well, I think if everybody shows up at that meeting with a 2 or 3 sentence mission statement, and then we just throw them all on the table and see, what works, it probably
Putting
is.
components together.
Yeah, I think everybody will have some good idea that we can incorporate into it.
But the things to concentrate, what do we want them to do? What do we not want them to do? What are our expectations and do we have timelines?
Okay, what,
Are there, and there may be other things that we want to make sure is in there, but
What time are you looking at on Tuesday, the 17th?
Tracy, you're the one that has the usual,
I gotta tell you, right now, with my house in the state that it's in, I'll make it if I can. I have to get back in my house before the end of this month. When you spend the whole day TSPing walls and putting down floors, I'll be here if I can. Set a time and I'll do what I can.
then I'd propose 4 o'clock.
Does that work for you?
I think it works for me.
Okay. Do we want to have it here?
go ahead, we want to tape this, we want to have it going out,
Okay,
so, yeah.
okay.
But we don't know, let me see if I can have the
Oh, yeah,
agenda, we're in November.
yeah. November
I
17th.
don't know that I've seen that.
All I don't have anything on that day.
Not about this room.
Oh. Oh, that's right, they do have the calendar up somewhere. I can never find it.
I mean, it should be pretty low key.
Yeah, Wednesday, everybody's booked, both here
Opera
and
House.
Richardson Room are booked on
Oh, yeah, I
Wednesday.
bet, yeah.
But,
Yeah, Wednesdays always, oh my God.
well,
that's
Wednesday's
paper
that
hard.
MUBEC thing and Midco Solid Waste. They're
Oh,
both happening at the
yeah.
same time.
Oh,
You and
the
I,
planning board is here.
Planning
MUBEC.
Board and MUBEC is here and we're over there with Midco Solid Waste.
Yeah. They will be videoing that one, right? The MUBEC presentation this time?
Did we just switch from the 17th? Are we still on the 17th?
Yeah, we're
No,
still on the
I'm just
17th. You're just
checking
saying
to
that you
see
can't go
that
to the
there's-
18th.
Yeah, we,
So-
we,
What do you find?
This building, this calendar has not been released for this month, so we don't know.
We're 5 days into the month.
Schedule
Okay.
it, and then if we have to change it,
Yep.
we'll change it.
Okay, we're scheduled 4 PM on the 17th, right here. Now, I want to ask one more question, and it's only a question. We don't need to answer it tonight. But what is your thoughts on, do we want to resolve the Bach gift now or push it down the road? Let's take, and I'm only building, scenarios here. Right now, there's only a couple of generations of Bachs out there, descendants from Mary Curtis. If we build this, and, assuming we build the building, it's on the double, it's there, it's good for 50 years. 50 years, we're not gonna, and it's just, we don't want it. I mean, there's gonna be 2 more generations of Bachs then to trace it down. Do we wanna try to trace it down and get an answer now on the gift? Would the Bach heirs right now want it back or not? Because if they don't want it back, as has been proposed or suggested, and we may not find that answer
It's
for
not a
8,
question of
12
them
months.
wanting it back,
What would
because
it cost legally?
they don't have the option of wanting it back until we vacate it.
Oh,
Until we vacate it, it's our property unless we vacate it.
Right, but if we did the due diligence on it and figured out who has to sign off on it, and I think Helen gave us some good information, because you're right, if the next generation, if they left everything to one person, then you've got a much easier line to follow rather than trying to figure out all
second
75
marriages
cousins,
and all
right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, now is the time to get them to say, oh, no, that's for a good purpose, that's fine, and get them to sign off on a new deed. If we were to do that at this point.
well, I don't know if we can.
No, it's not, it has, the purpose is clearly defined. The only thing that they'd be doing is removing the stipulation, the reverter piece that,
Right.
and it it makes it our property no matter what we decide to do with it. That's the only option.
But that seems like a smart thing to do.
I'm
at
hugely in
this
favor
point.
of that.
At what cost?
At a lot of cost.
Yeah, 'cause
So
it's
do you
gonna
think it's
be-
worth $30,000 to clear that? Sure. I'm sorry, I'm not the chair,
The
but.
state of Maine judges on issues like this has ruled against perpetuity.
Well, the problem
What
is,
they've done is to say, in their view, 89 years is long enough.
the issue though is this will was legated, whatever.
In the 60s.
But in Pennsylvania, wasn't that where?
Yes, it was in
went through?
Philadelphia, yep.
The deed is in the state of Maine.
Right.
Right, so I just want to follow this through just for a second. Are you saying that status quo after 89 years has force of law?
They can't enforce that deed in perpetuity.
Right, so basically that goes away. I mean, that's
Okay.
what California was going towards 30 years ago, was that you could, because people put silly things,
Yeah.
black people can never live on this piece of property. No, that, it exists.
Oh, yeah, I'm
And so, I know the state of California 30 years ago was doing its best to say none of those things could continue
The
after
only thing
some
I
period
can't
of
tell you
time.
is why 88 years, but that
Yeah,
was the advice I
Yeah. Okay.
But I think that it makes sense to us to find out about that, whether it be that would apply and that our attorney agrees with that, or that we take the time to follow up on errors and to try to find out how big the pool is that we're jumping into.
That's a simple question to ask the town council. I
Oh,
would
there's
think.
never a simple question to town
But if
council.
what David is suggesting, which is that perpetuity is 89 years, if that, I mean, it would be interesting to hear the town council's opinion on that in this case.
Okay.
Because I have heard other things where they have said, that it can't last forever because of, things change or whatever. But I don't know what the legal definition of that is. I don't know.
You don't play a lawyer on TV?
Okay, well,
Do you play
then
with
do
them?
we want to at least start the exploration of what the cost would be of tracking down the heirs, or do we want to just ask the town attorney is what
We have a lot
David,
to do.
is actually something that we really have, we can count on.
There's a lot for us to do in the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this has been part of the deed for 60 years.
Yep.
Just gotta make it through 28 more.
Right, I would, there's a lot on our plate right now to get done. And taking on one more thing, I think taking on one more thing right now is gonna be a lot of extra work.
Okay.
I think we should make sure this stays on our list in
Yeah.
the future, because I think that even $30,000 in the next 2 or 3 years is better than waiting another 40 years and having somebody say, oh no, you have to get a sign off, and now you've got 4 generations of people who've already passed away. So it seems like something worth following up on, unless, of course, the attorney says there's a limitation on those kinds of restrictions.
I'll back up. I think it's an easy enough question for me to ask the attorney, is that 88
Yeah,
years, 86
that's
years?
what I was
that
saying.
Does it
question-
apply
that
to
question-
us?
That question is an easy enough one. I mean, there's gonna be some cost, but
Right,
all I
but
have to
to
do is
get
ask
a-
the lawyer and then get the answer back.
To get a letter from her that says, this is what precedence is, I wouldn't push it if I were you, but, you know, I wouldn't go for 50 years, but I think it would be worth finding out about that. But if indeed she says that it could be in perpetuity, then I think we need to follow up.
Before David leaves, Mr. Chairman, can I
Yep.
ask David a question?
Yes. Oh, go right ahead,
Is
sir.
it possible, do you have any legal source for that, David, that you could send me?
Paul Gibbons.
Because that will help the lawyer.
I think it's true of most states that perpetuity was ruled out. They just don't accept the idea that anybody can do anything in perpetuity. So every state has come to some sort of view of
So if you could,
how many years is reasonable.
so if you could send me that citation, that will,
I'll ask Paul to send it to you.
okay, great, thank you, David.
Thank you. Anything else? Very nothing. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? I'm not even asking for discussion.
Thank you to those who.
Thank you.
That one's always unanimous.
Reclass, recess?
So if Rick